Chapter 464. When all the cheats could no longer display their effects, when all the manifestations and divine abilities were rendered ineffective, before absolute power, there was only despair. Yun-Yang had never been one to give up easily. However, when his life force had been depleted to its limit, even his signs of life were gradually fading, his deific consciousness could not be released, and his eyes could not even be kept open. No matter how indignant and resentful he was, he could only sigh helplessly. Yun-Yang had almost lost the ability to revert to his true form and return to the surface to meet Mr. Nyen. Although Emmy was still waving its tendrils impatiently in the space, twisting and turning with all its might to supply an endless supply of air of vitality, it was a pity that it was only a drop in the bucket for Yun-Yang's current condition. It could not keep up with the rate of depletion. It could only shrink its tendrils while ensuring its maximum output, trying its best to reduce its own consumption and assist Yun-Yang to the best of its ability. Such assistance could only linger at death's door. It was of no help to the overall situation. As Yun-Yang continued to be injured, his divine sense continued to be damaged as well. Emmy grew more and more exhausted. Although Emmy was in the alternate space, Yun-Yang's physical and mental condition was the foundation of its survival. Once Yun-Yang ceased to exist, Emmy would perish as well. Yun-Yang, who was underground, was injured physically, mentally, and spiritually due to the incessant injuries. He was slowly losing his strength and could barely hold on. His initial realm was in grave danger, but Yun-Yang was rather impressed by Mr. Nyen, who was above him. This person, this kind of tenacity, this kind of perseverance, is really worthy of admiration. However, Yun-Yang still had a vague feeling that something was amiss. This Mr. Nyen seemed to be a little too free. Who was Mr. Nyen? He was the master of the Four Seasons Tower. The master of the 5 venerable lords, the 4 supreme lords, many heaven realm cultivators, and the countless ace cultivators of the Four Seasons Tower. He possessed an unparalleled ability that was on par with the unrivaled expert Ling Xiaozue. For such a person to target him personally, he was giving Yun-Yang enough face. However, purely in terms of his identity, besides using such methods to obstruct me, isn't it a little overkill? Isn't it a little too demeaning to himself? From Yun-Yang's point of view, it seemed that only by appearing to save the 4 venerable lords from danger, severely injuring Old Mu with a single strike, and ambushing Lei Dongtian with a forceful strike, not staying for long after the deed was done, could he be the owner of the Four Seasons Tower, the world's top organization. And against a cultivator at the beginning stage of the heaven realm like him, he should have just turned around and left after missing his attack. As for the venomous words, the provocative words, and the talkative behavior of Mr. Nyen, he did not have the demeanor of a ruler who ruled over the world like Mr. Nyen. All in all, Yun-Yang's encounter with Mr. Nyen and his actions were vastly different from Mr. Nyen's identity and the impression Yun-Yang had formed from a glimpse of him. It did not match at all. In this regard, Yun-Yang was even a little belittled. He knew that what he was doing was futile, yet he kept on chattering. How King lonely are you? Could it be that no one has spoken to you for 800 years or something? However, no matter what, the other party's cultivation base was truly earth-shattering, and there was no doubt that it was at a level that could shock the world. Among all the experts that Yun-Yang had met in his life, he was unquestionably the best. Just as Yun-Yang was about to lose hope, or perhaps he had already lost all hope, suddenly he felt a faint ripple in the massive deific consciousness that shrouded above him. It was as if a powerful presence had suddenly arrived. Who was it? Was it a friend or foe? Yun-Yang perked up. Could it be that I am not fated to die yet? Could there be a turning point in this battle? Who was it that had come? Since Mr. Nyen did not kill him at once, it must be someone with a high status. Could it be Ling Xiaozue? Jun Moyan? Or perhaps Lei Dongtian had brought his men to seek revenge. Be it from any of the 3, it meant that there was a variable in this battle. What disappointed Yun-Yang was that the intertwining deific consciousnesses above him were much more peaceful. There was no hostile atmosphere at all. It was obvious that both parties did not intend to fight. Just as Yun-Yang was filled with hope and disappointment, his heart sinking into despair, Mr. Nyen's voice rang from above. Why are you here? Judging from his tone, the person seemed to be Mr. Nyen's acquaintance. Was he an enemy as well? Yun-Yang felt even more hopeless. One Mr. Nyen was enough to make him die a horrible death, yet another one had come? The other party did not speak, but the ripple of the deific consciousness grew slightly louder. Yun-Yang guessed that the person was communicating with Mr. Nyen through telepathy. That was probably the truth because Mr. Nyen's voice had disappeared as well. It looked like both of them were cautious people. Even in such a special atmosphere, they were still communicating through telepathy. Yin Yang was even more curious. Who was it that could make Mr. Nian react in such a manner? Although the newcomer appeared to be hostile and was most likely a foe to Yin Yang, the current situation was already extremely dire. It did not matter if there was one more enemy, especially when this person's arrival had turned Yin Yang's situation into a sliver of hope. Yin Yang forced himself to focus his remaining deific consciousness, focusing all of it to sense the ripple of deific consciousness in the air above him. For a moment his imagination ran wild. Yin Yang had done so because Mr. Nian had not drawn his sword during this period of time. It was the most relaxed moment he had ever been since he had been restricted. Emmy had seized the opportunity to transfer its energy of vitality rapidly. Seeing that the opportunity could not be missed, Yin Yang was naturally in high spirits. Seizing the rare opportunity, he absorbed the energy that Emmy had sent over without restraint and recovered his deific consciousness and body at full speed. Even if he still dared not attempt to break free, he could at least make use of this buffer time to give himself more leverage to contend with Mr. Nian. When Yin Yang had the time to recover, he observed his own body and was shocked to realize that it was like a desert that had been parched for 100 years. Endless life force surged in like a tsunami, but it was absorbed in an instant. There was almost no improvement to be felt. This state lasted for about half a cup of tea's time before he felt like he had come back to life a little, but he was still extremely weak. Fortunately, the ripple of deific consciousness in the air was still ongoing. Both of them were still conversing and had not returned to their previous state of targeting Yin Yang. Yin Yang did not know what they were talking about that they had actually spoken for so long. Yin Yang grew increasingly curious about the person's identity. Looking around the world, there were not many people who could converse with Mr. Nian like this. Yin Yang suddenly had a strange feeling. This person who had suddenly appeared not only had an important identity, but he was afraid that he might be related to him as well. Then, the ripple of deific consciousness disappeared, but the swooshing sound increased, more than doubled in intensity. Yin Yang was acutely aware of this reality. Could it be that his doomsday had arrived? The person was extremely powerful. Even if he was not as powerful as Mr. Nian, he was at least of a similar standard. With such a powerful aid, it would be easier for Mr. Nian to target him. Yin Yang had only managed to catch his breath now. He did not have the ability to escape at all. However, the powerful sword energy that he had expected did not appear. There was only the incessant swooshing sound. It was obvious that both of them were performing some sort of movement at an extremely high speed. What were they trying to do? What were they doing? There was only one answer. Yin Yang had already figured it out. Spiritual restraining formation. Yin Yang was utterly hopeless now. There had been a sliver of hope in his heart, but now that things had come to this, it was the final step. His end was finally coming. Mr. Nian had been guarding here for a month and had not done so. However, this person had changed his method in just a quarter of an hour after he had arrived. It seemed that this method was suggested by the newcomer. Heaven wants me dead. Emmy? Is there any way to increase my life energy in an instant so that my cultivation can increase quickly? Yin Yang asked anxiously. This was the only way Yin Yang could think of at the moment. He knew that it was nonsense, but he still asked with a sliver of hope. This was his last hope. He had hoped that someone would interfere, but there was none. Instead, the other party had waited for a powerful aid. Based on the current situation, even if Ling Xiaozue were to come, he would not be of much help. The only thing he could do now was to seek survival in the midst of death. Emmy was behaving strangely. It did not deny the idea at once, but it hesitated instead. Yin Yang grew even more anxious and urged, "Is there or isn't there? There's really no other way this time. If I can't increase my cultivation base rapidly and escape, there's only death awaiting me. If I die, you won't be able to avoid death as well. What's there to hesitate about?" Emmy was still hesitant, not answering for a long time. Updated late today. I've written this paragraph a few times. Uncomfortable. Chapter 465. Emmy's hesitation roused Yin Yang's spirits. The fact that Emmy was hesitant meant that such a method existed, but the price to execute it should be extremely high. I'm not asking for much. I just want to make a breakthrough on my current foundation. I believe you can feel it too. There's an underground river's aura about 3,000 feet below us. As long as I can dive down, I can escape this disaster. Otherwise, everything will be over and I'll definitely die. Yin Yang had long known that the current situation was his only chance of survival. It was one thing to know where the chance of survival was, but it was also an unavoidable reality that he could not reach his destination due to his lack of cultivation base. The space that Mr. Nian had sealed did not only encompass the sky and the ground. There was also a considerable area under the ground, up to a depth of 1,000 feet. All of these were within the forbidden zone of life that Mr. Nian had set up. Further down, however, was an area that Mr. Nian could not control. It was also a new and unfamiliar area that his sword energy had never penetrated. With the holy water charm's ability to sense the source of water, Yunyang could sense the underground river 3,000 feet below him. However, the pressure at the bottom was getting worse by the day. With every additional foot, the pressure increased. Yunyang's current position was already the limit of his cultivation method. He could no longer dive any further. Despite knowing where the chance of survival lay, he could only sigh at the river. Actually, underground rivers like the one on the other end existed under all the regions of the continent. The only difference was in depth. The underground river that Yunyang had sensed was exceptionally deep. It was 3,000 feet deep. Yunyang felt that this was the most unfortunate part of his situation. Where in the entire continent could there be such a deep underground river? 3,000 feet below ground level? Yet he had encountered it. Yunyang had a strange thought about it. There was no source of water within 3,000 feet of the ground. What an extraordinary oddity. This had led to the current predicament. Yunyang had been salivating at the underground river for 20 days. He could not think of a way out. Of course, it was also because the underground river was deep enough, so deep that it exceeded the detection range of Mr. Nian's deific consciousness. Otherwise, there would not even be a chance of survival. This was the only way out, but Yunyang was not capable enough. It was the reality that it was difficult for him to reach it, so it became an impossible strategy. Now that there was another enemy, although it gave Yunyang a little more breathing space and time to catch his breath, it also brought the bad news of the spiritual restraining formation. If he did not adapt, only death awaited him. Now, looking at Emmy's hesitation, Yunyang saw a glimmer of hope to get out of this predicament. He could not help urging it. There was no room for hesitation at this juncture. It was more important to proceed with whatever ideas they had. If they continued to hesitate, it would be too late. Yunyang could clearly feel that the surrounding spiritual qi of heaven and earth was being forcefully squeezed out in a slow but strangely tangible manner, as if it was being squeezed by someone. It was obvious that the spiritual restraining array was slowly taking shape. This place was about to become a spiritless place like Zilong City, where all manifestation abilities were rendered ineffective. There was not much time left for him. After all, once the spiritual restraining formation was fully operational, his physical body would be annihilated by the earth immediately due to the failure of his manifestation abilities. Aya, Emmy's voice sounded very sorrowful. There was indeed a way. However, the price was so high that it was unknown if it should be carried out. Once it was carried out, the consequences would be unimaginable. From Emmy's point of view, it was better to just die. Even if his physical body was extracted and killed by the spiritual restraining formation, his soul would still exist and he could be reincarnated as a human. By then, there would still be a trace of vitality left. As for Emmy, it would follow Yunyang and there would be no loss. However, if it were to adopt this method, it would be equivalent to suicide. A suicide where the soul and spirit would be destroyed. Then there would be no next life, he would be reduced to nothingness. Emmy could indeed forcefully fill all the current energy into Yunyang's meridians in an extremely short amount of time, filling him with all the life force and karmic chi of good and evil. It would then elevate one of Yunyang's abilities to a whole new level. This ability was called primordial borrowing. There was another well-known name for it, it was called star borrowing. In an instant, the power of the stars could be extracted and infused into one's body. However, Emmy did not want to do so at all. Otherwise, Yunyang would not have mentioned it when Emmy had asked him many times when he was on the brink of death. Emmy had 3 concerns. The first was that the battle had come so suddenly. Yunyang had been at an absolute disadvantage since the beginning, his body, mind, and spirit being injured continuously. More importantly, there was a gap. Even this method needed a certain buffer before it could be carried out. There was no room for it to be carried out previously. Secondly, Yunyang's cultivation base was still too low. Once he did this, there was a 99% chance that it would not be an enhancement of some ability but an explosion on the spot. The destruction of his soul and spirit. The power of the stars. Even if each star only provided a ray of starlight, how could Yunyang withstand it when it was gathered in his body? It was only a body of flesh and blood, yet he had to withstand such a massive force. This outcome was more serious than Yunyang dying directly because there were a few different ways to die. For example, if Yunyang's qi and blood were exhausted and his cultivation method was damaged, his soul would still be intact. As long as Mr. Nyen was gone within a certain time limit, with Emmy's current deep understanding of the soul, there was a high chance that it could reassemble Yun Yang's soul and resurrect him. Or perhaps reincarnate. However, if the primordial borrowing art failed, Yun Yang would perish immediately. It would be an irrecoverable death. This was also the main reason why Emmy had refused to tell Yun Yang the truth when he had asked it many times before. Now, however, the situation was different. Once the spiritual restraining formation was formed, Yun Yang's manifestation powers would fail again. The method that Emmy had planned would be utterly hopeless because holy water charm, art of blood, and other cultivation methods could no longer be used. That was why it had no choice but to reveal the primordial borrowing art. However, after Emmy's repeated assessments, with Emmy's ability to operate, in addition to the tenacity of Yun Yang's meridians from consuming the heaven and earth resources, and the endless medicinal potential in his body, the success rate of executing the primordial borrowing art was still less than 10%. After all, even if it was to spoil a seedling to hasten its growth, the seedling had to have a certain foundation and grow to a certain height. With Yun Yang's current physique, there were only 3 outcomes if he were to use this method recklessly. The first possibility was that he would explode and die on the spot, with his soul and spirit destroyed. The possibility of this was more than 90%, almost 100%. The second possibility was that he would become an idiot. This would be if the method was executed properly and succeeded, but his brain would be destroyed by the forceful impact of the energy in the process. Even Emmy could not help him recover from such an outcome. He could only accompany an idiot for the rest of his life. Thinking about it sent chills down Emmy's spine. As for the third possibility, it was the best outcome. He would successfully borrow the art and even escape, but he would still be severely injured afterward and lose his ability to cultivate, becoming an ordinary person. He might even be reduced to an ordinary person, one who was sick all year round and could not enjoy the lifespan of an ordinary person. Emmy would then become a lotus seed once again, floating between heaven and earth. There was a premise for all these possibilities. The manifestation powers of the 9 Supremes as well as the power of manifestation would be lost forever. Executing the primordial borrowing art meant that all the attributes in Yun Yang's body would be sucked dry. The 5 elements converged, heaven and man became one, yin and yang merged, the primordial borrowing art. Of course, there was another possibility. Not only did Yun Yang not die, his cultivation base had improved tremendously and he would be invincible from then on. However, this possibility was no longer minuscule. Emmy had never even considered this possibility, not even daring to think about it. Emmy guessed that the possibility was about 1 in 100 billion. In spite of this, Emmy knew that Yun Yang really did not have time now. The spiritual restraining formation had begun to be set up outside. If he did not act now, there would really be no more chance. Although Emmy was unwilling to let Yun Yang take such a risk, it could only support him now. Because this method with no chance of survival was really the only hope they had now. If he did not do this, he could only wait to become a corpse here. His soul and body would still be destroyed and he would be doomed eternally. The only exception was, however, even if I were to execute this method, I still need a chance, because there will be some aura leaking the moment I activate it. After all, there are still 2 unparalleled experts setting it up above. With their divine senses, they only need to release sword energy at the place where the aura is being emitted and everything will be over. A step earlier, Yun Yang racked his brain for ideas. He had a countermeasure now, but how could he restrain the 2 unparalleled experts above? It would be good to distract them for a moment. Up above, 2 figures were busying themselves, constantly throwing down a piece of jade that emitted a rainbow glow. The moment it landed on the ground, it would sink deep into the soil and disappear. A small-scale spiritual restraining formation could be set up very quickly as long as there were sufficient materials and mystical chi cultivation base. With what the 2 of them were doing, it did not require much effort at all. There was only one corner left to complete the spiritual restraining formation. Once the setup was completed, whether Supreme Cloud had turned into wind, water, or any other form, his manifestation would be removed and he would return to his human form. Perhaps, his physical body would be completely crushed by the underlying force. The 2 men were about to toss the materials in their hands out to complete the last bit of the setup. It was at this moment that a strange wave came from beneath the ground. Had Supreme Cloud made his move? Was he making his final struggle against the most dreaded spiritual restraining formation before his eyes? Mr. Nyen frowned. He could not help concentrating, the long sword in his hand beginning to hum. Another person floated down from midair and stood beside Mr. Nyen. His expression was solemn as he observed the area where the commotion had occurred. In the next moment, however, both of their expressions changed at the same time. We've been tricked. Behind both of them, a powerful and direct wave of energy had appeared abruptly. A ray of rainbow light had shot out from the ground. Swoosh! The radiance was already thousands of feet above the sky in an instant. Chapter 466. Both of them roared at the same time. Boundless sword energy left their hands and pointed straight at the rainbow radiance in the sky. At the same time, both of them sprung up as well, charging over at their highest speed. However, just as the two of them rushed up, there was another strange fluctuation coming from below. Moreover, it wasn't from one place but from 3 different directions at the same time. It was as if Supreme Cloud had gone berserk underground. Mr. Nyin and his companion were still quick to react. There was no hesitation throughout the entire process. One of them maintained the momentum of a comet as he chased after the rainbow silhouette in midair, while the other turned back immediately, pouncing towards the ripples on the ground. From rushing to higher ground to turning back, the entire process was as smooth as flowing water. There was not the slightest bit of reluctance. Sword light flashed. With a soft cry, Mr. Nyin flew out like a dragon. Looking down from above, his sword energy was unleashed to its limit. At this moment, Mr. Nyen's sword energy and sword light were like giant axes that could split heaven and earth apart, slashing down with an earth-shattering force. The current situation was within Mr. Nyen's expectations. He had long predicted that Supreme Cloud would not wait for his death, especially when the spiritual restraining formation that was aimed at him came again. He would definitely make a last-ditch effort at the last moment, and this was Supreme Cloud's only chance to strike. Therefore, Mr. Nyen had long been ready to strike. Even though everything seemed to have happened out of the blue, he was actually well prepared. Furthermore, this was the decisive strike, so the force of his attack was several times stronger than before. With a loud bang, the 3 locations were shrouded by flashes of sword light at the same time. In an instant, dust filled the sky. The strange sword chi with a strange attribute immediately covered the space of 1,000 feet around the 3 locations. Yun Yang, who was performing his mystic art, felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His heart stopped abruptly. The moment Yun Yang's heart stopped, Ami's unique mystical energy surged into him like a great river. At the same time, the sky that was supposed to be as bright as day suddenly appeared amidst the snow-filled sky. Densely packed, they shot out abruptly, forming a miraculous scene of starlight illuminating the sun. It felt like a long river. High up in the sky, the person who was in hot pursuit slashed at the rainbow silhouette, but he was surprised to find that the falling object was indestructible. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the rainbow silhouette was actually a saber. It was a mysterious saber with a strange shape, but it looked exceptionally beautiful. It was a saber that no one could bear to part with. The fact that the saber light could withstand a full-force strike from a master of such a level without being destroyed was already a testament to its extraordinary quality. Delighted, the person reached out to grab it but did not forget to remind Mr. Nyen on the other end, complete the spiritual restraining formation immediately. Below, Mr. Nyen's sword light shot out, but he suddenly felt the ground shake as the starlight from the horizon fell straight down. The power of heaven and earth was so overwhelming that even a powerhouse like Mr. Nyen dared not face it head-on. Mr. Nyen knew that things were not looking good, so he made a prompt decision. The few remaining pieces of rainbow crystals in his hands flew out and flew towards the designated location like a meteor chasing after the moon. In the sky, just as that person's finger was about to touch the blade of heaven's will, the blade of heaven's will suddenly flashed and mysteriously disappeared. On the ground, the entire mountain began to shake. Dust rose thousands of feet into the sky, threatening to cover the sun. For a moment, one could not even see their fingers or see anything. The rumbling was deafening as dozens of mountains crumbled at the same time. The power of the stars fell with a tremendous force, disintegrating all the mountains within 100,000 feet radius. The ground quaked as if the entire continent was enraged. Faced with such a phenomenon, Mr. Nyen could only watch in shock, his mind blank. What was going on? Supreme Cloud? If Supreme Cloud had such capability, it would not be difficult for him to fight him head-on or even kill him. How could he have been forced into such a state? However, if this was not Supreme Cloud's doing, what was going on? Beneath the ground. Not only did Yun Yang, who had been channeled by Emmy, regain his vigor, but a tremendous force surged into his body with a boom. Yun Yang felt his body tremble violently, his soul almost completely shattered at that moment. He forcefully endured the excruciating pain, relying on the last bit of clarity in his mind to cast the holy water charm once more. Driven by the boundless force, Yun Yang's holy water charm cultivation base was elevated to a terrifying height in an instant. It was as if all the water in the world was under his control. He unleashed it with all his might. Almost in the blink of an eye, the water 3,000 feet below the ground suddenly surged upward with a loud boom. Yun Yang, who was channeling the holy water charm with all his might, endured the excruciating pain that felt like his soul was being torn apart, and dived with all his might, following the space where Mr. Nian's sword energy had landed. In the blink of an eye, he had already dived at least 2,000 feet deep. Yun Yang could already faintly feel the chill of the underground river beneath his feet. He felt relieved and was about to go with the current when the spiritual restraining formation was unexpectedly activated. Yun Yang felt his body grow heavy, losing his water manifestation and returning to his human form. Following the inertia, he tumbled into the surging underground river. Without the control of the holy water charm, the underground river's water that fell instantly brought rolling sand and Yun Yang's body along with it, plunging straight into the depths of the ground. In an instant, it had returned to its original flow of the underground river, surging forward like a great river. In the blink of an eye, he had already gone somewhere unknown. With a boom, the mountains exploded. Gravel pierced through the air and waves filled the sky. It was a scene of the end of the world. On the ground, the two men waved their long sleeves. Their expressions did not change in the face of the collapsing mountains and splitting earth. They waved their sleeves calmly, brushing away the shattered rocks and flying dust. One on the left and the other on the right, the two men parted all the gravel around them before diving down like two bolts of lightning. Rumbling sounds could be heard from time to time. It was the sound of the two men knocking the rocks that had just been shattered aside or smashing them into smithereens. As far as the eye could see, the 2,000 feet deep still had traces of the underground river gushing up. It was still damp. Both men exerted their strength at the same time. With the flash of their swords and a loud boom, they plunged another 100 feet down, but there was no trace of Yun Yang. They repeated this for more than a dozen times. After a dozen consecutive strikes, the rumbling sound of the underground river could be faintly heard. Just as the two men were about to continue their efforts and reach the underground river to continue their pursuit of Yun Yang, the aftermath of the landslide above them finally showed itself. With a deafening rumble, both sides of their heads caved in at the same time. For a moment, not only was there a scene of devastation, but the landscape had also changed. Both men cursed, unleashing their thick mystical chi at once in an attempt to withstand the earth-shattering force with their own domineering force. Both of their cultivations were already at the pinnacle of the world. Even a landslide wouldn't be able to cause any harm to them. In spite of this, they could not stop the inertia of the collapsing rocks and soil. When the collapse ended, both men were shocked to find that they had returned to a position close to the surface. The thousands of feet wide hole beneath their feet that they had just created was now sealed tightly by the collapsed rocks and soil. Supreme Cloud's aura had truly vanished this time. There was not a single trace of him left. Arg! The person who came next howled into the sky. His hands parted and two rays of sword light shot out at the same time. It was obvious that the person was still unwilling to give up. He did not want to give up the chance to kill Supreme Cloud just like that. Countless rocks and soil flew out once more in response to the sword light. Mr. Nian also lent a helping hand at the right time. An hour later, a super deep hole that was more than 300 zhang deep had appeared where the two of them stood. The width at the top was no less than 10,000 zhang, and it looked like a huge funnel. In front of both men they were already 3,000 feet below the ground. A raging underground river, only 20 to 30 feet wide and of unknown depth, surged and flowed into the other end of the pitch-black hole on the other side. Mr. Nian's expression was ferocious. With a rub of his hands, a staff made entirely of mystical chi appeared in his hands. He plunged it directly into the underground river and lengthened it until it was about 100 feet long before he could confirm the bottom. The underground river was only 30 feet wide but 100 feet deep. The current was rapid. After such a long time, with Supreme Cloud's water manifestation ability like Supreme Waters, it was likely that he was nowhere to be found by now. Moreover, this was different from before. Supreme Cloud's shape-shifting ability could be put to good use here. Even though they knew that he was in this underground river, there was nothing they could do. They could not catch him any longer. Who would know which drop of water was Supreme Cloud in the entire river? Even if their cultivation base was impeccable, it was impossible for them to evaporate the underground river completely. He's gone. Mr. Nian sighed softly, a strange glint flashing across his eyes. He truly did not expect that he would fail to eliminate the 9 Supremes remnant even after he had personally come out with his overwhelming ability and planned ahead. Every move he made was highly targeted. Supreme Cloud is not fated to die yet. We can only look for another chance next time. The other man said faintly, however, the next chance is right before our eyes. We only need to look for it on the battlefield. Yutong is at a critical juncture now. As long as Supreme Cloud gets out, he'll definitely go to the battlefield. That's true. He has something to worry about. It's hard for him to escape death. Mr. Nyen nodded. Both men exchanged glances and flew up without hesitation to return to the ground. Keeping the spiritual stones used to set up the spiritual restraining formation, they soared into the sky and headed east. On the ground, water slowly seeped out of the funnel-shaped hole dug out by the two experts. It was like a gigantic eye glinting with sarcasm. This plot is driving me to death. Chapter 467. In the blink of an eye, both Mr. Nyen and Yun Yang had disappeared without a trace. He had no lingering feelings for this strange lake that he had created with his own hands. What Mr. Nyen did not know was that his departure meant that he had truly lost the best chance to kill Supreme Cloud. The moment Yun Yang landed, the spiritual restraining formation had been successfully activated. Yun Yang's shape-shifting ability had completely vanished at that moment, reverting to his human form. Due to the backlash of the arcane art, he had fallen into a coma and could only drift forward along with the underground river. Mr. Nyen only needed to jump into the underground river and search ahead. He would be able to find Yun Yang within a few dozen miles. He would be able to kill him effortlessly. However, he had not thought of this. After all, Supreme Water had transformed into water and his ability to hide in water form was too deeply ingrained in people's minds. Mr. Nyen would never believe that his ability would be sealed by the spiritual restraining formation when he had successfully escaped under such circumstances. What was more, someone who possessed the ability to create such an earth-shattering event would faint because he could not withstand the backlash. It did not make sense at all. Therefore, Mr. Nyen had easily let go of the once-in-a-lifetime chance to kill Supreme Cloud. Yun Yang, who had reverted to his physical form, had been swept far away by the underground river. Unconscious, he could only drift with the current passively. When he woke up again, he was surprised to find himself at the edge of a shallow pool. Looking around, he realized that there was a huge mountain behind him. It was a lofty mountain with steep ridges and lush greenery as far as his eyes could see. Looking from afar, he could not help but feel at ease. A stream of water, like a raging dragon, gushed out from a deep cave, seemingly endless. Yun Yang woke up slowly. As he scanned his surroundings subconsciously, he almost fainted again before he could rejoice at the fact that he had survived the ordeal. Closing his eyes almost instinctively and breathing in the fresh air, Yun Yang was finally sure that he was still alive. In the next moment, it was not to rejoice that he had escaped death but to be assaulted by endless agony. His head felt like it was about to explode. The sudden pain caused Yun Yang to spasm. He wanted to roar to vent some of the pain, but he was shocked to realize that he could not even make a sound. It was as if his throat was being sliced by thousands of knives. But at this moment, the physical pain was nothing in comparison. The key was his brain. It was like countless stars exploding in his brain one after another. Yun Yang was in excruciating pain, his eyeballs almost popping out of their sockets. He tried his best to control his mystical chi to suppress the strange state of his body, but he realized that his dantian was empty. There was not even a trace of mystical chi left. Yun Yang cultivated the endless divine art in agony, only to realize that the divine art that had been with him ever since he had returned to the world had disappeared from his body. He wanted to open his sea of consciousness and ask for Emmy's help, but he was still disappointed. He could not connect with his sea of consciousness at the moment. His cultivation base, mystical skill, deific consciousness, dantian, and sea of chi were all silent. They were even worse than ordinary people. Feeling the endless pain that was like the waves of the ocean, wave after wave, Yun Yang had the urge to commit suicide countless times in just a short quarter of an hour. Yun Yang used the only finger of his right hand that he could move to grip a large rock beside him, gripping it tightly until his finger bones were broken. Blood dripped from his wound, but he could not feel the pain from his finger wound at all. All he could feel was the incessant stabbing pain in his mind. Wave after wave, again and again, it was as if there was no end to it. I want revenge. Unable to make a sound, Yun Yang was roaring in his heart, using his will to fight against the endless pain. My brothers are still waiting for me to avenge them. I have to hold on no matter what. To be able to escape from this battle means that the heavens have not forsaken me. I can't give up on everyone's blood feud. I must annihilate the Four Seasons Tower and kill Mr. Nian and all those who ambushed our brothers that day. I'll never give up if I don't avenge this. Yun Yang's eyes bulged, his temples throbbing. His veins bulged like two raging dragons. He gritted his teeth, allowing blood to flow from the corners of his mouth. At this moment he no longer dared to cry out. He was afraid that if he opened his mouth to cry out, his willpower would completely collapse. He shut his mouth tightly, gritted his teeth, and gripped the rock with his fingers. It was obvious that he no longer had the slightest bit of profound energy to support his broken fingers, but they were actually, slowly embedded into the rock. The hard rock that had been washed by the water for who knew how many years slowly began to show signs of being scratched. Yun Yang's eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking as if there was a great temptation in front of him, but it was actually just an ordinary scenery that could be seen everywhere. Yun Yang's mind was filled with images of his brothers coming to him, their gentle and comforting gazes. Brother. Xiao Jiao. Hang in there. We're all waiting for you. Supreme Cloud can't fall. The 9 Supremes can't be annihilated. Remember to avenge us. The warm words were still in his ears, comforting Yun Yang's parched heart. The scene changed abruptly, turning into a sea of blood and mountains of corpses. Blood and broken limbs littered the ground while crows cawed in the sky. Pairs of eyes that had died with grievances stared at the sky, their gazes frozen with grief and indignation. Those were his brothers. His 8 brothers. His 800 brothers. Mr. Nian's voice rang like the devil again. That's Supreme Earth, isn't it? He's been beaten until his flesh and blood burst. Who's the other Supreme? Seeing that Supreme Earth is dead, he actually went crazy and charged over to seek his own death. Coincidentally, he was slashed into 2 with a single slash. A hoarse growl escaped Yun Yang's throat. There was only madness in his gaze. Hints of savagery flashed through his frozen gaze. Then his father appeared. His wrinkled face was still smiling warmly. Child, do you know how to make the Chinese cabbage and tofu that I've taught you? Is it delicious? Yun Zuyu, who was dressed in white, looked at him sadly. Young brother, don't give up. You mustn't give up. The scene changed again. It was Dongshuan's million-strong army, ready for battle. Han Sanhe, who was overseeing the army, was issuing an order spontaneously. Today we shall finish this battle in one fell swoop. We shall annihilate Yutong, we shall not return without victory. The flags of the Four-Nation Coalition army covered the sky. Countless men and horses swarmed into the peaceful homes of Yutong's people. Countless innocent people were struggling under the iron hooves, howling and crying in despair. 9 Supremes Lords, save us, 9 Supremes Lords. 9 Supremes Lords, where are you? The spiritual restraining formation. The spiritual restraining formation had appeared again. The Four Seasons Tower. A domineering voice rang out, kill the 9 Supremes, there shall be no saint in the universe. Only the Four Seasons Tower shall dominate the world. Yun Yang's eyes were wide open, watching the images flash before his eyes. He stared at them without blinking, enduring the boundless pain. The agony that Yun Yang was currently enduring, even if it was only a quarter of an hour, was enough to turn a man of steel who was not afraid of death into a soft worm. Even if 100 people were to perform the tendon dislocation skill on one person at the same time, it would not be as painful as 1/100th of this. If it had been anyone else, they would have long been overwhelmed and given up. After all, living like this was much more difficult than dying. However, Yun Yang had endured it. Endured it. He had endured it for a whole day and night. When Yun Yang was restrained by the spiritual restraining formation previously, not only did it render his water manifestation ineffective, it had also caused the primordial borrowing art to go out of control and cause him to suffer an unprecedented injury. In addition, he had lost his cultivation base, mystical skill, and deific consciousness. Now he could not even move a muscle. His right hand, the only part of his body that could move, had been crippled by Yun Yang himself. Yun Yang, who could not move, was left with only his sense of sight and touch. He could feel the light before his eyes slowly dimming, turning into darkness. The stars twinkled, the night fog and the cold wind blew slowly, the sky was overcast. A chill fell on his face. It was snowing. Was it snowing again? The side of his face gradually turned silvery white as the heavy snow fell from the sky. His eyes that were once glaring in anger were gradually covered by the white snow, and he could no longer see what was before him. However, the flame in his heart burned higher and higher while the pain in his head grew more intense, not slowing down even as time passed. Streaks of blood seeped slowly from the snow that had been frozen on his face. Then it was frozen again, seeped out again and froze again. Yun-yang remained motionless, the excruciating pain in his head making his heart churn. I have to hold on no matter what. I have to get through this. Only by getting through this can I seek revenge. The night passed slowly as the snow grew thicker. Yun-yang was completely covered by the white snow. With Yun-yang's current physical condition where he had lost his cultivation base and was severely injured, the snow alone was enough to endanger his life. The next day at dawn, arg! A roar that was so hoarse that it was almost inaudible, but it had exhausted all of Yun-yang's energy gushed out of his mouth. At the same time, a gust of white air spurted out of his mouth along with the arg. He could finally move. The excruciating pain in his head was still there, but it was much lighter than yesterday. Occasionally, when a wave of pain came, the two green veins on Yun-yang's temples would bulge and his brain would sink into the excruciating pain that felt like it was being torn apart. However, as long as he could get through this wave of pain, he would be able to catch his breath. Compared to the agony that had lasted for an entire night, the slight respite he had now was more than enough for Yun-yang to feel relieved. Yun-yang could not help but let his imagination run wild. After going through this painful training, he believed that 99% of the punishments in this world would be ineffective on him. Even if all of them were applied to him at once, Yun-yang was confident that he could hold on until he died without making a single sound. The so-called punishment, compared to what he was experiencing now, compared to the agony, was truly insignificant, not even worth mentioning. Yun-yang panted and tried to control his body to move. He placed his right hand on the ground, trying to prop himself up. Another wave of pain assaulted him. This time, the pain did not originate from his brain but from his right hand, where his broken fingers were. Then, the physical pain throughout his body seemed to have been awakened from its slumber and flared up like a tidal wave. Yun-yang grunted in agony. The physical pain was unusually intense, but it was still not something that could be endured by ordinary people. However, Yun-yang, who had been assaulted by the extreme pain in his brain for a day and night, was still able to tolerate it, even though he was not to the extent of ignoring it. His body moved with great effort, moved a little, moved again, and with a flip he finally moved away from his original position, and with another flip he was back to facing the sky. The ice and snow that had covered his face for the whole night had all fallen off. What appeared in front of Yun-yang now was a dusky sky. Snow was still fluttering like goose feathers. However, the icy coldness that fell on his face seemed to be able to lessen his pain a little. Only then did Yun-yang have the time to check on his current physical condition, to confirm the extent of the damage he had sustained. He vaguely remembered that his right leg seemed to have been broken in the underground river. Even the slightest movement from his tibia would cause him pain. What was even more frightening was that he could not feel the lower half of his right leg. Yun-yang wanted to confirm the situation, but he could not straighten himself, so he could only touch it with his hands. Finally, the broken part of his right leg was still attached to his body, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Other than his broken right leg, his left arm was broken into a few pieces as well, hanging by his side like a snake. 3 to 4 of his ribs were broken as well. The situation was out of Yun-yang's expectation. He had thought that he would have at least 8 to 9 broken ribs, but only 3 to 4 were broken. Yun-yang was pleasantly surprised. His right arm had been preserved among his 4 limbs, but it was a pity that he had committed suicide and crushed it. All 5 of his fingers were broken and bloody. Lastly, his left leg was completely numb, but there was no sense of pain. It must have been a problem with his posture. When he turned over just now, he felt a sizable wound on the back of his head. There was no blood, so it must have formed a scar. It was the same with his external injuries. There was not a single spot that was not injured. Yun-yang wanted to use his internal vision to check on his internal injuries, but he realized that he still could not muster any spiritual energy after a night. However, the injuries to his internal organs seemed to be equally severe. What confused Yun-yang the most was Emmy. He could not contact Emmy at all. This also meant that he could not use his biggest trump card, the super cheat of life force. As for Whitey and Gigi, they had been thrown into Emmy's space by Yun-yang. Now, he could not find anyone to help him even if he wanted to. Yun-yang laid on the muddy ground, panting as he controlled his breathing. The injury this time feels more serious than the battle at Tianshan Cliff. At least Emmy could save me last time, but this time even Emmy is silent. Yun-yang sighed. However, it seems that my current situation doesn't match the few possibilities Emmy mentioned. I didn't perish on the spot, I didn't become an idiot, and I didn't become an invincible expert. Even the possibility of becoming an ordinary person doesn't seem to be. Yun-yang could clearly feel that his dantian was not crippled. Although he could not muster any mystical chi now, it was only because of his injuries and exhaustion. After recovering a little, he could still muster mystical chi. This means that I'm not crippled. Yun Yang felt that he could actually find a shred of comfort in such a hopeless and tragic situation. However, Emmy was right about one thing. The power that belonged to the 9 Supremes in his body was gone. Not even a trace of its existence was left behind. However, Yun Yang realized that there seemed to be another strange force in his body. However, this force did not listen to his command. Yun Yang did not know how lucky he was. Why was Emmy unwilling to use this method until the very end? It was because Yun Yang had no hope of pulling through. If he used it, only death awaited him. To use the power of a mortal to activate the treasure of heaven's will, to communicate with the power of the stars and infuse it into the human body. What kind of physique could withstand such an enormous force? How much power does a star have? Could be said that a star could be a Tianshan continent. It could even be bigger than the Tianshan continent. Even if it was a smaller star, how small could it be if it could exist in the night sky for eternity? To activate the power of the stars in one go, what kind of person could eat tens of thousands of Tianshan continents in one go? Everything else aside, even if Yun Yang were to consume all the treasures of heaven and earth in the Tianshan continent right now, it would be enough for him to explode 1,000 times. Although each star transmitted an insignificant amount of energy to the celestial body, there were too many of them. Yun Yang was not supposed to be spared. However, the most fortunate thing was that Mr. Nian had activated the spiritual restraining formation the moment the starlight shone down on him. The spiritual restraining formation weakened a portion of the power of the stars while Yun Yang immediately entered the underground river, preventing most of the stars' power from entering due to the spiritual restraining formation's influence. When the power of the stars broke through the spiritual restraining formation, Yun Yang was already in the underground river, drifting far away. Just like that, the power of the stars fell on the ground and into the funnel lake. From there it became a blessed land. In time, spiritual herbs would surely appear in droves. On the other hand, Yun Yang had managed to escape the danger of exploding. Due to the spiritual restraining formation, Yun Yang's human form had sealed a portion of the power of the stars in his body. This power of the stars was the force that Yun Yang felt, but it was not the mystical chi force that Yun Yang thought it was. Half a day later, the sun was high up in the sky. Yun Yang took a deep breath and rolled around. Using his broken arm to support himself, he finally managed to sit up. It was only then that he realized that he was on a beach. Beneath him was sand that was as fine as powder. Less than half a foot in front of him, a river gushed into the distance. One of his legs was still soaking in the water. He turned his head, wanting to look elsewhere, but he heard a cracking sound coming from his neck. It was so painful that he was almost tearing up. His neck bone had been dislocated. After confirming his position, he shrugged his shoulders and twisted his neck with a loud crack, turning the dislocated part back. He shuddered in pain. His neck could finally turn. Covered in mud and ragged, Yun Yang felt like a zombie that had crawled out of a grave. Around him, the mountains and rivers were covered in snow. Looking around, there were no footprints on the snowy ground, only a few shallow triangular paw prints. Some kind of bird must have stopped there. With his current strength, he would never be able to walk out. However, this place seemed to be deserted. He recalled the legends about a certain senior who fell into the abyss or the underground river, always encountering a fortuitous encounter, meeting an unparalleled expert, and learning an invincible martial arts skill. Yun Yang looked left and right, but there seemed to be no trace of any fortuitous encounter or expert. Instead, he was about to starve to death. When he was trapped, Emmy provided him with energy so he did not feel hungry. Now, however, his body was made of flesh and blood. He would starve to death if he did not eat. He still wore the spatial ring given by Lei Dongtian on his finger, but without mystical chi he could not even open the ring. Yun Yang moved his body with great difficulty. Just pulling his feet out of the water and turning his body bit by bit on the beach was already so painful that he almost fainted several times. Then he found a place he could lean on and leaned against his back. Only then did he dare to lie down and open his mouth to swallow the snow that was covered in mud and sand from his movement. Swallowing a mouthful of snow, he felt that his stomach was frozen as well, but his spirits were lifted. After a dozen mouthfuls, the last mouthful of snow melted in his mouth and he spat out the mud and sand. Yun Yang sighed and realized that he could speak now. Enduring the pain in his throat, he called out hoarsely, "Is there anyone here?" It was quiet all around, there was no reply. Yun Yang immediately stopped this unwise action. Looking around, he was now under the riverbed and there was a groove in front of him. Even if someone passed by, they would not be able to see him. Besides, his voice was too weak and could not travel far. A few more cries would exhaust his remaining strength. What he needed the most now was to save himself. Yun Yang used both his arms and legs to crawl forward on the snowy ground, ignoring his broken limbs. There was a gentle slope in front of him. In the river below the slope, Yun Yang noticed that there were a few stones covered in snow. That was where the water flow was relatively slow and the river was not deep. Then what were these stones for? It meant that someone was crossing the river, using these stones as a cushion. If that was the case, although the slope was covered in snow, it was also a path that must be taken to cross the river. Yun Yang could see that side from where he was, but if he were to look over he would not be able to see Yun Yang due to the cliff. Therefore what Yun Yang needed to do now was to climb over there. It was only a distance of 100 feet. Usually Yun Yang could jump over it with his eyes closed, but now this distance of 100 feet was like 1,000 mountains and rivers to Yun Yang. It was so difficult to cross it. He crawled on the snowy ground bit by bit, trying to control his balance using his chin, his broken arm, his shoulder, and even his abdomen. Inch by inch he inched forward. He had to control himself and not slide back because of the icy snow when he crawled forward. It was noon when he started crawling over from the river. However, it was already dark when he reached the edge of the slope. Yun Yang could no longer hold on. He laid quietly on the snowy ground and fainted. Before he fainted, he could only stretch his bleeding right hand forward and place it higher than his body on the snowy ground. This way if someone came by, even if his body was covered in snow, he could still see his hand. He could also see the fresh red of blood. After doing all this, Yun Yang fainted. The rest was up to the heavens. If someone passed by and had a kind heart, he would still have a sliver of hope. If no one passed by, or if those who passed by ignored him, then he might have to leave this world forever. Brothers, if you can see me from heaven, send someone to save me, Yun Yang mumbled to himself in his coma. Chapter 468. When Yun Yang woke up again, he was shocked to realize that there seemed to be a faint light lingering beside him. There was a group of people fighting beside him. Let me see too. Let me see this rare thing, this rare person. Unbelievable. It's really rare. F***ck me, I couldn't believe it when I heard it just now. So it's true. Amazing. This is F***king amazing. Tisk, what a miracle. I can't be sure if it's a miracle or not, but at least it's a miracle. Your father will kneel, will you? This is unbelievable. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I really wouldn't believe it. Yun Yang was dumbfounded. What was going on? What nonsense was this? Yun Yang opened his eyes and saw a row of heads hovering in front of him. All of them were staring at him with curious and shocked eyes, as if they had seen something rare and precious. It felt like a group of people were watching and saying, "Wow, there's a big tiger in a cage here." Although Yun Yang had the reputation of being a popinjay in the past, his looks were truly outstanding. He was used to being looked at and admired by others. It was only right for beautiful things to be admired by others. Now, however, he knew himself best. What was there to look at with his looks now? Yun Yang could still feel his head throbbing in pain, but he could not help asking, "What are you all looking at?" Once he spoke, Yun Yang was taken aback. He could actually speak and his enunciations were very clear. He's awake, he's alive. Oh my God, he's still alive with such a serious injury. Not only is he alive, he can even speak. I heard it clearly just now. Miracle. This is definitely a miracle. It's not fake at all. Old Lu, the person you saved, is alive. Your efforts were not in vain. Yun Yang understood at once when he heard that. He had been saved by a kind-hearted person, and the reason these people were watching him was actually because they were surprised that he was still alive after such a serious injury. At this time, an elder appeared in front of Yun Yang with an amiable smile on his face. After studying Yun Yang for a long time, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Young friend, you're really lucky. If it had been anyone else, they would have died 1,000 times over after suffering such severe external and internal injuries. But young friend, you're actually alive. Once you've woken up, your vigor is growing stronger. It's unbelievable. This old man has been practicing medicine for so many years, but this is the first time I've seen such severe injuries in such a unique condition." Yun Yang replied strenuously, "Thank you, elder, for saving me. It's a good thing that you've regained your vitality, but your injuries can't be rushed. You need to recuperate." The old man smiled. "Just now, I brewed a bowl of medicine for you. Drink it quickly and go back to sleep. For you, complete rest is the best way to recover." With a single thought, Yun Yang felt that all the injuries on his body had been treated. The broken bones all over his body were all fixed by some bamboo sticks and wooden blocks. His chest, back and all over his body made him look like a mummy. Of course Yun-yang dared not rest right away. He asked again, "May I ask, old uncle, where is this place? Which country does it belong to?" The old man looked at him in surprise and said, "This is the southeast of the Empire of Yutong, belonging to the Empire of Yutong's Tianan Path. It's a small mountain village under the jurisdiction of Starlight City's Chioshui district. It's called Yellow Mountain Pass Village." Tianan Road. Starlight City, Chioshui County. Yun-yang heaved a long sigh of relief, his gaze a little lost. He knew of the Tianan Path and Starlight City that the old man mentioned, but he knew nothing about Chioshui County. However, since this place belonged to Starlight City, it shouldn't be too far away. Therefore, this place should be about 5,700 kilometers away from the eastern battlefront. If Yun-yang's ability had not been damaged, he could have covered this 5,700 kilometers in 2 hours. Now, however, Yun-yang closed his eyes dejectedly. Even if he were to go to the battlefield now, what could he do? He had lost his cultivation base, his external and internal injuries were unusually heavy, especially his manifestation powers. He was even weaker than an ordinary martial artist. If he were to really go to the battlefield, he might just lose his life in the blink of an eye. Therefore, the only priority now was to heal his injuries and recover his cultivation base as soon as possible. As for how much he could recover, everything would be left to the future. Right now, the only thing he could not do was to give up. He closed his eyes to rest and recuperate, but the people beside him were talking. "I wonder who this fellow is. He looks like he came from the battlefield." "That's most likely the case. Looking at him, even 10,000 people wouldn't be able to beat him up so miserably. Is the battle really so tragic?" One can see the general trend from the smallest detail. It's obvious how terrifying it was. "I wonder how Xiaolu and the rest are doing now." At the mention of this topic, everyone sighed, and the atmosphere became silent for a while. Yun-yang opened his eyes and turned his head with difficulty to ask, "War?" It was only then that he noticed that the onlookers around him were mostly middle-aged and elderly people in their 40s or 50s. Any one of them had a face full of wrinkles, traces of weathering and vicissitudes. One of them asked, "You didn't come from the battlefield?" Yun-yang sighed. "I was on the way to reinforce the battlefield. I was beaten up by experts from other countries. Oh my God, the road to the battlefield is so difficult." "And there were ambushes by experts from other countries along the way?" The group of people was stunned when they heard him. "The Empire has issued a death warrant. All citizens have joined the war, swearing to protect their homeland." An elder saw through Yun-yang's confusion and explained, "We are small villagers from the mountains, but everyone has a responsibility when the country is in danger. The young hunters in this village have all been organized, a total of 36 people, to go to the battlefield. I wonder if they can arrive safely." Yun-yang felt a surge of warmth in his heart. If the world was at peace and Yutong was at peace, we would naturally hide here and stand aloof from the world, seeking only peace and happiness. However, now that we're facing an autumn of destruction, although we're ordinary people, we can't live in peace. Sending our children to the battlefield to help is our duty. We don't seek to turn the tide, but we seek to have a clear conscience as Yutong's people when the country is in danger. The few old men's faces were filled with solemnity. Actually, you were discovered by Xiaolu and the rest when they crossed the river and left the mountain. We thought you were a wounded soldier from the battlefield, but as Yutong's people, we naturally felt a sense of kinship, so we sent you back and instructed us to take good care of you." An elder said kindly, "Child, you've been injured from the battle after all. Since that's the case, you're Yutong's warrior. As long as you're still breathing, we'll try our best to save you even if we have to spend all our wealth. Recuperate in peace." Another elder said seriously, "You're right. This is what we all know. All those who are injured on the battlefield are our heroes. What's more, your injuries are so severe." The meaning behind his words was clear. If he had not gone through an unusually brutal battle, how could his injuries be so severe? Yet he was still alive despite such injuries. This had already proven that Yun-yang was not an ordinary person. One could only imagine how brutal the battle Yun-yang had faced was. At the same time, it also proved his identity as Yutong's hero, a warrior on the battlefield. Yun-yang said softly, "I'm ashamed." The few elders comforted him hurriedly. Yun-yang felt a burning passion in his heart, an unprecedented surge of emotion surging within him. With such a nation, how could Yutong be annihilated? How could it be annihilated? Then, afraid that they would disturb Yun-yang's rest, the elders left the room quietly and closed the door. Yunyang could still hear the soft sighs outside. I wonder if the 9 Supreme Lords can join the war this time or not. I heard that the situation this time is unprecedentedly dangerous. Dong Xian is invading with the entire nation's military force. That's right. If not, how could His Majesty have given the order to fight to the death, mobilizing the entire nation to face the national crisis together? The severity of the current situation is unprecedented. We've finally had a few years of peace, but now it's going to be chaos again. Sigh, I don't get it. Yutong has never provoked the other countries in recent years, nor have we initiated a war. Why do these countries have to target us so relentlessly? Could it be that they can only die in peace after conquering the world? I don't understand. These are probably the considerations of the important figures. We only need to do our part. Sigh, how I wish I could be younger by 8 to 10 years. Even if this old man is only 40 years old now, I'd still dare to go to the battlefield and fight those warmongers. How can the people live if there's a war every day? Yun Yang sighed inwardly. He calmed himself down and began to channel his mystical qi with all his might. There was really nothing he could do with his current physical condition. Instead of being anxious, it would be futile. It was better to try to recover quickly. After all, what he needed the most right now was to heal his injuries and recover his ability. Hopefully he could still make it to the battlefield in time. Rush to the battlefield and join in the war that would determine Yutong's survival. Yun Yang spat out a mouthful of blood, feeling weak all over. It was already the middle of the night. There was no progress in his body and cultivation method that he had set his heart on recovering. There was no other reason than that the meridians in Yun Yang's body were extremely fragile. Even the slightest movement of his breath would cause them to shatter instantly. How could he cultivate to his fullest potential? Yun Yang had already expected this and knew that he could not be impatient. He could only take it slow, but the pain in his mind would still assault him from time to time. His internal organs also felt like they were doing somersaults in his stomach. The excruciating pain made it even more difficult for him to circulate his energy. Fortunately, the food that Yun Zuyu had fed Yun Yang the other day was proving to be effective. The massive energy stored in his meridians and muscles was slowly being released now, repairing Yun Yang's body spontaneously. After multiple attempts, Yun Yang realized that he had to wait for the hidden energy to repair his meridians completely. Otherwise, any movement of his breath would trigger an excruciating pain in his meridians, as if his meridians were being torn apart. Forcefully doing so would even interrupt the healing process. Because of this, Yun Yang decided to do nothing but lie down and rest with his eyes closed. Early in the morning, another bowl of bitter medicinal soup was gulped down, waking Yun Yang up from his drowsiness. Yun Yang felt it and moved his body gently. He realized that the pain in his body had lessened, especially the tearing pain in his mind. As for the wounds all over his body, they were showing signs of healing. The old physician who had treated Yun Yang exclaimed that it was a miracle. With the severe injuries that Yun Yang had sustained, it would be hard for him to recover even if he recuperated for a month or two. It was only reasonable that he would be bedridden forever, unable to recover. Unexpectedly, this patient had recovered so much in just one night. The vigor of life that he exuded was not what a severely injured patient should have. Of course, the old physician did not know what kind of mystical energy was stored in Yun Yang's body. It was only reasonable for him to have such an effect. If it were not for Emmy's disappearance and the disappearance of his manifestation powers, the external and internal injuries were nothing to Yun Yang. To be able to recover to this extent within a day, you must be a remarkable figure, the old physician said respectfully. Although the old physician did not know Yun Yang's background, he could vaguely feel that Yun Yang was not an ordinary person, not even an ordinary cultivator. He could very well be a legendary ace cultivator, an unparalleled expert. You're too kind. I'm only a lowly soldier of Yutong. Yun Yang said respectfully, you're the true hero who saves the world. The old man smiled humbly. Grandfather? A youth's voice rang out. A youth around 15 or 16 years old walked in, the childishness still lingering on his face. He was carrying a large basket of frozen herbs on his back. It was really difficult for a child to find such a thing in such a snowy day. Just by looking at the travel-worn look on the youth's face, it was obvious that he was exhausted from the trip. You're back? Take a rest and catch your breath. Dinner will be served soon, the old man said kindly. Yes, grandfather. I have something to discuss with you. The youth's childish face was filled with hesitation. When the old man heard the word discuss, he shuddered inexplicably. His voice turned low as he said, if it's not important, don't discuss it anymore. Don't let our guest laugh at us. The youth bit his lips hesitantly and lowered his head. The tips of his feet pressed against the ground, his face flushed, but he could no longer say what he wanted to say. The old man sighed softly and said faintly, "Speak. I want to go to the battlefield." The youth lifted his head abruptly and said, "I want to go to war. I want to go to the battlefield." The old man's frail frame trembled again as he murmured, 13 years ago, your father said the same thing?" He turned his head slowly to look outside the door and murmured. Then, the youth's eyes were red as he said, "Dongshuan's traders have invaded my land. Yutong is in danger. I, your son, want to go to the battlefield. I want to avenge my father. I want to fight for Yutong. I want to kill the enemy." The youth knelt on the ground with a plop. "Grandfather, the few of us have discussed it. We want to leave early tomorrow morning." "How many of you?" "There are actually so many of you?" The old man asked shakily. "Who? Who else?" "Erniu, Taiju, Xuanzi, Huzi, Kaizi. There are 12 of us." The youth puffed up his chest and said, "Uncles have all gone. We're all grown up now. It doesn't feel good to loiter around the village all day. We only feel humiliated every day now. We can kill the enemy and serve the country." Humiliated, the old man turned around slowly and said in a low voice, "Even if you want to go, the families must agree. If all of you leave this village, other than women, children, and old men and women, there really isn't a single strong man left." The names that the youth mentioned were all the children in the village. The strong men in the village had all gone to the battlefield, so these children were the only strong laborers left in the village. They could be said to be the inheritors of the bloodline. The youth bit his lip and lowered his head in silence. Obviously, he understood the meaning of his grandfather's words. He really did, but then the old man made up his mind and said, "Since you have decided to go, wait for another 2 days. Grandpa will help you pack up your luggage. Tonight, child, Grandpa will make delicious food for you and some dry rations. Then, let the aunties and grannies make clothes and cloth shoes for all of you. I'll let all of you fill your stomachs and travel warmly." No. Yun Yang, who was lying on the bed, sat up abruptly, his eyes gleaming. "At least wait for another 4 days." The youth turned to look at him and asked in surprise, "Why? Why do we have to wait for another 4 days?" Yun Yang said in a low voice, "Because in these few days, all of you have to learn the art of killing on the battlefield from me. For yourselves and for your families at home, you have to increase your ability to kill the enemy and increase your ability to protect yourselves." The elder's murky eyes brightened and he asked worriedly, "Sir, your body?" Yun Yang endured the pain all over his body and said resolutely, "It's no longer a problem. Haven't you already felt that my body is getting better? The children have the heart to serve their country and are determined to go to war. I'll teach them some self-defense skills. When they're on the battlefield, at least, they'll have some ability to protect themselves. They'll have more ways to kill the enemy." The elder was moved to tears and said repeatedly, "Thank you, thank you." Although the old man was from a remote village, he was experienced in the ways of the world. How could he not know that the so-called self-defense skills were the cultivation methods of superior martial artists? The art was not easily taught. It was easy for Yun Yang to say it, but the old man dared not treat it lightly. Furthermore, the old man knew that anything could happen on the battlefield. The possibility of accidents happening to new recruits who did not know anything was too high, especially when they were at a disadvantage in terms of combat power. An ability that could increase one's combat power and protect one's life on the battlefield was indescribably precious. If this person in front of him could really teach his grandson the art of fighting on the battlefield, wouldn't that mean that his grandson would have countless more chances to escape death? The elder turned back and hollered, "What are you waiting for? Kowtow to your teacher." The youth was stunned and was about to kneel. Yun Yang was ashamed. There was nothing more he could do now. Forget about the fact that the old man had saved his life. Just looking at the fact that the child was still going forward despite knowing the dangers of the battlefield, he should help. He waved his hand forcefully and said, "There's no need for unnecessary formalities. There are only 2 days. Even if you want to learn more, I can only teach you some practical things. There's no need for kowtowing." In the afternoon of the same day, Yun Yang asked someone to carry him out. The group of teenagers who were prepared to go to war stood before him like tree stumps. There were 12 of them, not a single one missing. Each of the youth's eyes were trained on Yun Yang with a burning gaze. Killing on the battlefield is different from ordinary fights. The first thing you have to understand is that you're not afraid of death. On the battlefield, the more one is afraid of death, the faster he will die. Yun Yang endured the throbbing pain in his head and enunciated each word clearly, "All of you don't need to know too much about other things. What you have to remember now is that on the battlefield, you must take good care of your comrades. This is one of the two strongest weapons for survival on the battlefield. Not afraid of death? Take good care of your comrades? The youths were obviously confused. Yes, these two. The latter is even more important than the former. Yunyang nodded seriously. Only when you're willing to block the saber for your comrades, will your comrades block the arrow for you. Where did the saying brothers on the battlefield go through life and death together come from? It comes from this. Perhaps you will die for your comrades, or perhaps your comrades will die for you. But as long as everyone thinks of each other and protects their comrades, then their battle strength will increase by several times out of thin air. The youths did not fully understand Yunyang's argument, but they bore it in mind. Not afraid of death. Take good care of your comrades. The two strongest weapons on the battlefield. The latter was even more important than the former. I can only move one hand now. Even if I force myself to move, I can only demonstrate it. I won't demonstrate it to you personally. Now that there are two of you, do as I say. I'll teach you some killing moves on the battlefield. First, with bare hands, how to use a saber, how to use a spear. You don't have to consider other weapons. There's no such thing as elegance on the battlefield. The two weapons I've mentioned just now are the weapons with the greatest lethality on the battlefield. The other weapons, like the long sword, are flashy but not practical. It's hard to put them to good use, so don't try to cultivate them. Besides, there are a lot of ownerless sabers and spears on the battlefield. Even if your own weapon is gone or broken, you can easily grab a weapon that fits your hand. Yunyang watched as the youths practiced the skills they had just learned. Each of them knew that this was a way to save their lives, so they treated it seriously, not daring to be the slightest bit careless. Now, I'll teach you the art of qi cultivation and breathing. Yunyang thought about it and said, the effect of this art is effective. It won't make you martial artists or cultivators, but it complements the recovery of your physical strength on the battlefield. The effect is immediate. If you still want to learn something else, I'll teach you after you come back alive from the battlefield. Remember, if you can come back alive from the battlefield, I'll really teach you a profound cultivation method and embark on the path of cultivation. Of course, the youths did not know the weight of Yunyang's promise. All they could do was nod with a silly smile. It was not that Yunyang was being selfish and unwilling to impart the advanced cultivation method to these youths, but he knew that it was too late to impart any advanced cultivation method to them now. The war would probably be over by the time they could cultivate a cultivation method of that level, just by the time they could sense the qi in their cultivation. Only the breathing method that Yunyang had taught them that could recover their physical strength and the method to train their muscles and bones were the most practical. For the rest of the afternoon and night, the youths were sweating in the yard as they trained diligently. No matter when, don't fight with all your strength. No matter what, you have to preserve some of your energy so that you have room to breathe. The comrades beside you are the closest people to you. On the battlefield, they're closer than parents and brothers. Don't look down on anyone even if you can beat 10 of them with one hand. Even when you're the most tired, remember to shout the slogan. Yunyang taught them patiently, when you're exhausted, shout the slogan together with others who are equally tired. It'll regenerate a surge of energy in your body that has no potential. This energy is called faith. What slogan should we shout then? What's the most useful slogan? A youth asked foolishly. Yunyang thought about it and said, the most useful one is to shout that Yutang is undefeated, we have a home. For our parents, for our family. For the future. Brothers, let's fight. Yunyang knew very well that such seemingly useless and aimless slogans could often be extraordinarily effective in a life-and-death moment on the battlefield. When a person shouted out the hot-bloodedness in his chest in a desperate situation, it would increase his strength inexplicably. At the very least, that strength would be able to support him to fight with his life on the line. The next day, Yunyang was still urging the youths to cultivate, to practice killing and to practice ways to preserve their lives. Only at night did they practice breathing in place of sleep. Although they had only been cultivating for a short period of time, the breathing method was effective immediately. Although the youths were still new to it, they could already feel the benefits of this method. Using it to replace sleep, not only would they not feel tired the next day, they would also be more focused. This further strengthened their belief in what Yunyang had taught them. Yunyang had gained a lot from this day and night as well. He could clearly feel the powerful potential within his body being unleashed faster and faster. The broken bones in his body were beginning to feel itchy, a sign that he was about to recover. Recover a little faster. Recover faster. It was the morning of the fourth day. Each of the youths was carrying a huge backpack, standing straight in front of Yin-yang. Yes, they were departing today. No matter how reluctant they were, they had to embark on this journey to war. In the bags on their backs were the rations, clothes, and a pair of cloth shoes with 1,000 sols that were finely stitched together. Almost all the resources of the entire village had been gathered in these backpacks. Some women stood on the road outside, trying their best not to let their children see their sorrow, but tears still fell uncontrollably. "Thank you, teacher." There was a loud cry. The 12 youths knelt on the ground in unison and kowtowed to Yin-yang 9 times. Yutong has the 9 supremes, so Yutong's most respectful greeting to others is to kowtow 9 times. To you we must do so, even though you're not willing to admit that we're your disciples. In Yutong, as long as someone kowtowed to him 9 times out of gratitude, it meant that this person respected him as much as he respected the 9 supremes. This was the highest form of reverence, the highest form of respect. "Get up, all of you," Yin-yang said in a low voice. "I have a letter that I need all of you to deliver. You must be going to the Fortress of Resilience, to the battlefield this time. No matter which of the 3 people you see, you can pass my letter to them. As long as you say that you're sent by young Master Yun, this trip will be safe." The 3 of them are called Fu Baogua, Qiu Jianhan, and Shengguan Lingxiu. "She's a woman," Yun-yang said seriously. "If you don't see the 3 of them in person, don't take the letter out." "Yes," Tai Zhu answered loudly. He was the oldest among the youths, already 18 this year. He was the leader of this group of children. He went forward to receive the letter respectfully and carefully placed it in the pocket of his shirt that was closest to his body. The others, including the elderly, felt that the first 2 names sounded familiar, as if they had heard them somewhere before, but they did not think too much about it. After all, no one would have thought that a soldier who had been crippled on the battlefield would actually know the 2 marshals of the empire. They did not know that this letter, this message, was the true life-saving talisman of the 12 youths. "If they ask me about young Master Yun's whereabouts, just tell them that I'll be there soon. Half a month at most," Yun-yang said. "Also, all of you must use the breathing method I've taught you, even if you're sleeping during the journey. Don't slack off for even a moment. It's best if you can make it your instinct and get used to it. Practice your combat skills every day. No less than 6 hours are allowed, no matter how tiring the journey is. That's the foundation for your survival on the battlefield. Do you understand?" The youth's eyes glowed as they committed every word to memory, etching it deep into their hearts. The entire village carried Yun-yang to send the 12 youths off. Everyone was smiling. "Go in peace. This is the time for men to use their martial arts, to kill the enemy and serve the country, to make contributions. We're here at home. You don't have to worry about anything." The 12 youths knelt at the end of the road and kowtowed respectfully to the entire village. They then stood up and turned to leave, not a single one of them looking back. The morning sun shone on their backs like they were covered in a layer of colorful clouds. Seeing that the youths' silhouettes could no longer be seen, sorrowful cries could be heard from the crowd that was sending them off. The ultimate battle of millions of troops from both empires. The ultimate battle that would decide the fate and well-being of the nation. The extreme battle that would annihilate an entire nation. How much could the strength of 12 youths be worth? These 12 youths would probably be drowned by the army once they reached the battlefield. Would they be able to see them return safely in this lifetime? Who knew how many of them would return when the 12 of them left today? No one had the slightest confidence in this. There was only hope, only blessings. How many youths in the entire empire of Yutong would step into the battlefield with their blood boiling? The feelings of these thousands of families were the same. Chapter 469. After another 2 days, Yun-yang's injuries were getting better and he could already stand up. Although he still could not exert any strength in his broken leg, he could already limp a little. This was undoubtedly a huge improvement. What made Yun-yang even happier was that the agony in his mind, the agony that had been gnawing at his bones, had almost disappeared. Yun-yang felt that his injuries were getting better and tried to channel some mystical qi again. Although his organs were still torn apart and it was difficult to channel it, he did not spit blood this time. Instead, there was a faint sense of qi in his dantian. Another night and I'll be able to channel mystical qi. Yun-yang sucked in a deep breath. He was truly relieved. Yun-yang was actually very worried that his mystical qi would be crippled as well, but it seemed that everything was fine now. For the entire night, Yun-yang had been stabilizing his breathing. The tingling sensation that coursed through his body made Yun-yang feel blissful. In Yun-yang's eyes, his injuries were finally starting to show signs of improvement. The latter half of the night. In the pitch-black room, Yun-yang grunted abruptly. Two beams of light shot out from his eyes amidst the pitch-black space. In the dimly lit cottage, a lightning-like radiance flashed in the illusory room. His Dantian sea of qi that had been unconnected for 7 days and 7 nights suddenly had a weak energy that pulsed faintly. Then it rose slowly and reappeared in Yun-Yang's senses. Amidst Yun-Yang's inexplicable joy, his meridians slowly circulated along the route of the endless divine art that he had long determined. His shattered meridians had just been repaired, so they were still very tender. Yun-Yang channeled his mystical qi slowly through them with extreme care. Yun-Yang's meridians, which could have gone through hundreds of circulatory cycles in a single breath, were only able to complete a single circulation from late at night to daybreak. Yun-Yang exhaled heavily, spitting out a mouthful of blood. It was not the reverse flow of blood in his meridians, but the blood clots that had been forced out from the circulation of his cultivation method. Just this mouthful of blood was enough to heal 10% of Yun-Yang's internal injuries. Seeing that his injuries were getting better, Yun-Yang dared not slack off. He continued the second cycle, the speed slightly faster than before. The inexplicable energy in his body gradually returned to Yun-Yang's meridians along with the mystical qi, repairing his damaged meridians swiftly. As he continued to cultivate, Yun-Yang slowly entered the state of oblivion that he had not experienced for a long time. The old physician woke up early in the morning and came to Yun-Yang's room to take a look. He saw his patient lying flat on the bed, his breathing abnormally even, with barely visible intervals between each exhale and exhale. A layer of white air was slowly rising from his body. As the white mist rose like the morning mist, the bruises on his face also slowly faded. Such a heavy injury was actually recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, the old physician could not help but be shocked. He instantly thought of some legendary figures. Could it be that the person I saved is actually an extraordinary person? A general in the military? But this person is obviously very young. He's definitely not someone who can maintain his youthful looks like the legends say. As the mystical qi circulated, the endless divine art was slowly activated. Yun-Yang's original appearance was revealed as well. Looking at the face that was slowly showing its delicate features, the old man dared not believe that the person before him was some important figure. The person before him was too young indeed. Even if he was compared to the 12 youths who had just left the village, he would not be much older. The endless divine art. Ceaseless thought, ceaseless growth. Ceaseless qi, ceaseless growth. Now Yun-Yang could truly be considered to have entered the unique cultivation state of the endless divine art. Ceaseless thought. Ceaseless thought. Yun-Yang's body was gradually enveloped by the white mist. It was as if a giant steamer had appeared in the room. His meridians were recovering bit by bit, gradually becoming smoother and more flexible. As the meridians strengthened, the speed of mystical qi circulation increased as well. When noon came, a peculiar cracking sound came from Yun-Yang's body. It was the sound of his dislocated bones returning to their original positions in an instant. The moment they were restored, his internal organs churned immediately. Yun-Yang opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of purplish-red blood. What followed was a series of violent panting. Although this action had forcefully interrupted the cultivation method that was being channeled, it had also forced out most of the extravasated blood in his body. After spitting out the purplish-red extravasated blood, Yun-Yang felt more than twice as light as before. Instinctively he wanted to get off the bed. Just as his broken leg touched the ground, an excruciating pain and a soreness that seemed to penetrate into his bones assaulted him simultaneously. Yun-Yang endured the pain and realized that he could actually stand steadily, but he still could not move one of his legs. As long as I can start again, I can be at ease. Everything after this will all come back to me. The day of Yun-Yang's return is not far away. Yun-Yang's gaze was determined. He still could not contact Emi, and the manifestation power of the 9 Supremes was almost non-existent. His cultivation methods like the holy water charm could not be executed either. It was as if they did not exist at all. However, Yun-Yang firmly believed that his various abilities would return sooner or later. The most important thing now was still to recover. He had to recover his body to its optimal state before discussing the follow-up. When the old physician returned from seeing a patient, he realized that Yun-Yang, who had been lying on the bed yesterday, was already pacing slowly in the yard. Yun-Yang had even greeted him with a timely smile when he saw him. The old physician was even more astonished, his eyes wide and mouth agape, his heart pounding in fear. Wasn't this progress a little too fast? It was such a serious injury, especially that leg. It was clearly broken. He had personally confirmed it and fixed it with his own hands. Why did you come out? Your leg has just been broken, you mustn't be impatient. You need to rest quietly. If you act so hastily and leave any sequelae, it'll be a lifetime of regret. Yun Yang smiled warmly and said gratefully, "Thank you, old sir, for your concern. However, I know myself. I can only recover better and faster if I move around more. Besides, I can't wait any more." Yun Yang's gaze was distant. The child knows to go to the battlefield. How can I spend my days here leisurely? It's a waste of time. Yun Yang's voice was filled with murderous intent. Although the unique manifestation power of the Nine Supremes could not be unleashed now, could it not be that Yun Yang's own strength could not kill? Another 3 days passed. Yun Yang felt that his cultivation base had recovered by 1/10 while his body was fine. Although he still could not fight intensely, traveling was no longer a problem. However, Yun Yang still chose to stay for another day. The purpose of him going to war was to kill the enemy, to go to the battlefield. He could not let others protect and take care of him. Therefore, even if it was necessary to go to war, he had to have the ability to do so. It was not enough to just have the heart. As his meridians were unblocked, Yun Yang's cultivation base recovered faster and faster. In addition, Yun Yang could now open his spatial ring with mystical qi. In the spatial ring, there was a top-grade medicine from the Shenhuang world that he obtained from Lei Dongtian. It was extremely effective. Yun Yang gulped down 6 bottles in one go without hesitation, immediately feeling extremely relaxed and in good condition. The only thing that troubled him now was that his broken leg and arm had yet to heal. Most importantly, the divine edge was also in his deific consciousness space. After losing the connection with Emi, his subconscious could not be opened or even probed. Naturally, the divine edge could not be retrieved either. What a great loss this time. Under the winter sun, Yun Yang slowly summed up his previous behavior bit by bit. I was still too impulsive. However, if things were to be repeated and I heard that old Dugu has been captured and is about to be executed, should I go? Yun Yang thought about it and chuckled bitterly. Even if things were to be repeated, I'd still go. I'd still be impulsive. Because this is a family that I can't abandon. Knowing the outcome, I'd still go. What if I knew that this was a trap from the 4 countries before I went? What if I knew that the country would be facing such a critical situation before I went? What if I knew that the country would be besieged on all sides? What if the country was in danger of being destroyed? Yun Yang's heart was filled with contradictions. His impulsive mentality still held the upper hand, but his rationality told him that he should not go if that was the case. If he did not go, no matter what the reason was, be it for the country or the people, the condemnation of his conscience would follow him for life. A man's greatest hatred is an unfaithful wife and an unfilial son. A man's greatest helplessness is that it's hard to be loyal and filial at the same time. Yun Yang heaved a deep sigh. At this moment he could empathize with these words. It was fortunate that he was not ambushed in the sky above the battlefield. If Mr. Nian had not intercepted him midway and had chosen to wait for him on the battlefield, he, one of the 9 Supremes, would have been killed on the spot under the watchful eyes of millions of Yutong soldiers, unable to retaliate at all. The morale of the army would have been reduced to nothing in an instant. If that happened, Yutong would truly be done for. On this very night, the old physician watched Yun Yang pack his things quietly and asked worriedly, Are you leaving now? Your injuries? The old man's eyes were filled with worry. From his point of view, Yun Yang could not move at all. No matter how he recuperated, he would need at least 2 to 3 months. However, Yun Yang had made up his mind and was determined to leave. He could not stop him no matter what. Chapter 470. It's all right, Yun Yang said with a smile. Don't worry, old man. My injuries are fine now and I have medicine with me. I'll need at least half a month to reach the battlefield in my current state. This half a month's time is enough for me to recuperate. The elder sighed. Rushing on the road and recuperating from his injuries were originally contradictory actions. If one were to travel at full speed, it would be extremely rare for one's injuries to not worsen. How could one recuperate while traveling? What nonsense, what a self-deceiving way of saying. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only let it be. Seeing that Yun Yang had made up his mind and that it was useless to stop him, the old physician said softly, Perhaps you can choose to take a slight detour. You'll see a grassland after going over this mountain we're at. As long as you don't go too deep into the forest, you won't encounter any dangerous mystical beasts. Yun Yang asked. What did the elder mean by saying this? Time was running out now and he still wanted him to take a detour? Even if there was no danger, it was still a completely different choice. Could there be another meaning to it? On that vast grassland, there are herds of wild horses. The elder said, there are at least hundreds of thousands of them, maybe even more. Since you have a profound cultivation base, it shouldn't be difficult to capture a wild horse. I believe it'll be a great help to this journey if you have an extra leg. No matter what, it can save you some energy to recuperate. Yun Yang was hit with a sudden realization when he heard the explanation. He then recalled that almost every family in this small village had horses and each of them was an outstanding breed. When the 12 teenagers had left, the war horses that they had brought along were all of superior quality. So this was the root of it all. I'll go take a look. Yun Yang was tempted. With his leg in this state, it would save him a lot of energy if he had a good horse. Late at night, Yun Yang left quietly, not informing the rest of the villagers. Only the old man was there to send him off. Unexpectedly, when the elder sent Yun Yang out of the door, he realized that half of the village had come. She stood quietly in the night sky watching Yun Yang leave. A few old men trembled as they stepped forward. Behind them were a few women. The old man took the 2 parcels from the women and said sincerely, "Warrior, you're going to the battlefield to fight for Yutong. You must be careful. My generation is old and weak and can no longer set foot on the battlefield. The women at home have worked overnight to make 10 pairs of cloth shoes, 20 caddies of flatbread, and a harness. This is just a small token of our appreciation. Please accept it to strengthen your morale." Looking around, Yun Yang could clearly see that there were a few women in the crowd who were paying special attention to him. Each of them had a small parcel in their hands. Those women were the mothers of the 12 boys who had left. Yun Yang felt a sudden surge of warmth in his heart. There was a heartfelt envy that he could not suppress. Up until now, what Yun Yang had desired the most in this life of his was the care of his family. He did not know if it was a trick of the heavens, but not only had he lost his parents since he was young and lost his blood ties, every family that Yun Yang had acknowledged until now had a difficult life. The 9 Supremes, Yun Zuyu and Old Dugu had all had a hard time meeting him again. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan had inexplicably provoked a peerless expert like Lei Dongtian and had not been able to return to their original selves for years. All of these seemed to be telling those who were close to Yun Yang that there were no exceptions, no exceptions. However, it was also because of this that Yun Yang was even more envious of those who were cared for by their family, cherishing that care even more. "Thank you." Yun Yang accepted the parcel solemnly and carried it carefully on his back. He bowed deeply. "Thank you. Take care, my fellow villagers. If I can survive this battle, I shall come back to reunite with all of you again." Warrior is no ordinary man. You will be able to make a name for yourself on this trip. You will be conferred the title of Marquis and General in the next dynasty, a Duke and Marquis for generations to come. It is truly heaven that Yutong is not going to perish in this war. The few elders looked at him solemnly, their voices sincere as if they were making an oath. At this time, the mothers of the children walked out together. Warrior is the teacher of those children. The mothers of those children know that Warrior is leaving, so they have to do their best. However, Warrior has 2 hands and is injured, so you can't carry too much. This old and useless one has made the decision to let each of them sew 2 pairs of cloth shoes. Please don't mind, Warrior, fill them in your luggage. Yun Yang's Adam's apple bobbed, not knowing what to say. 24 pairs of cloth shoes with 1,000 layers of soles were placed neatly in front of him. Each pair was sewn with the sturdiest linen thread, the stitches meticulous. The soles were the real 1,000 layers of soles made from home starch. The uppers were made of the sturdiest metal thread snakeskin. Lastly, the upper was the most common and soft fabric, but there was a thin layer of cotton sewn inside. Although it was not aesthetically pleasing, it was definitely sturdy, comfortable, and durable. This was the most practical and best parting gift. It was also the most homely gift Yun Yang had ever received in his life. "Thank you." Yun Yang bowed solemnly and said, "If I can meet a few young fellows on this trip to the military, I'll do my best to watch over them. I hope that all 12 of them can return safely." The 12 women bowed at the same time, their eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for your care, teacher." Their attitudes were so pious. It was as if a promise from the person before them could ensure the safety of their sons amidst the thousands of soldiers. Yes, at least to them this promise was undeniable. In reality, however, even if Yun Yang had not lost the power of the 9 Supremes, he dared not guarantee the safety of anyone on the battlefield. He could only say that he would do his best, that he would do his best. "Have a safe journey, Warrior. May you succeed." The entire village, old and young, women and children, bowed at the same time, their voices sonorous. "Defeat Dongshan, strengthen Yutong. Bless our people, protect our people." Yun Yang, who was carrying a huge bag, bowed solemnly as well. Then he strode away just like the 12 youths that day without turning back. Because he knew that everyone was looking at his back. The more determined he was, the more confident he was. If he were to turn back now, it would only make him look guilty and cause them to doubt the safety of their children. This was not a situation Yun Yang would like to see. Yun Yang's silhouette finally disappeared at the intersection, just like the 12 youths that day. No one knew when he would return. Up until now, no one in the village had moved. Only soft sighs came from the mouths of the people. What a fine young man. The old physician sighed and did not continue. After a long while, the crowd dispersed. When they returned home, everyone in the family couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. On the table of each household, there were 2 heavy ingots of gold. Each ingot of gold was at least 10 taels. 2 ingots of gold could at least ensure that these families would not have to worry about food and clothing for the next few years. Everyone went out to inquire, only to find out that each household had 2 ingots of gold. There was nothing more, nothing less. No one doubted the origin of the gold. Everyone knew that the gold had been secretly placed in his house by the warrior who had just left. However, no one had noticed when he had done it. Other than the 2 ingots of gold, there was also a letter on the old physician's table. There were a few lines of cursive handwriting on the letter. Pearls and jade are not as valuable as the human heart, how can gold buy deep feelings? The young serve the country, the women and children continue to make a living. Do not despise this small token of my appreciation. I shall do my best to ensure the safety of the children in this village when I go to the battlefield. Rest assured, father and elder. When the day of victory comes, we shall drink together. We shall not return until we are drunk, that is the joy of life. There was no signature at the bottom. However, the old doctor knew who wrote it. His body trembled and tears of excitement filled his eyes. He then took out the note and showed it to everyone in the village. Everyone was indescribably grateful and their hearts felt a lot more at ease. The warrior knew that without the young men in the village, it would be difficult to make a living in the future. However, with the gold he had left behind, it was enough to ensure a stable and prosperous life for the entire village. Even if the war were to last for 3 to 5 years, the gold would be enough. His arrangements were meticulous to the extreme. This person is meticulous and has a profound mystical skill. His actions have the bearing of a successful person. I wonder who he is? Our small village is actually fated to be acquainted with such an important person. It is truly a blessing from the heavens. An elder sighed softly. Yun Yang left Yellow Pass village and headed east, coming to the mountain that the old physician had mentioned. Yun Yang, who had regained his mobility and a portion of his mystical skill, climbed up easily. In less than an hour he was already at the top of the mountain. Looking down, all he could see was darkness. However, since he was already here, there was no need to turn back. He climbed down carefully. When he reached the foot of the mountain, there was a thick layer of snow and thick, withered grass beneath it. There seemed to be the sound of galloping horses coming and going from afar. This place was truly a natural horse farm. Even though it was the middle of winter, the horses were still galloping merrily. To be fair, the old physician had indeed given Yun Yang the best choice. Yun Yang had lost all of his manifestation powers. Although his mystical skill had recovered, it was still a long way from completion. If he were to travel to the eastern border with only 2 legs, it would be difficult for his injuries to recover even if he could reach it in half a month. However, if he had a good horse as a means of transportation, the situation would be vastly different. Otherwise, Yun Yang would not have come here to find a mount that suited him, as the old physician had suggested. At dawn, the sky shone brightly once again. Chapter 471. The herd of wild horses was endless, uncountable. The horses stopped in the middle of the meadow, where there was a huge geothermal hot spring lake that was emitting hot steam. It was probably because of the existence of this geothermal hot spring that the natural stud farm was full of life and was not afraid of the harsh cold. Beside the hot spring lake, the water and grass were even more abundant, not inferior to that of spring and autumn. Some of the horses jumped into the water and swam around, but most of them were grazing quietly, wagging their tails in a leisurely manner. Even Yun Yang was affected by the tranquil atmosphere. For a moment, he did not want to disturb the horses' peace and tranquility. However, at this moment, a long neigh came rumbling from afar. The horses by the lake were immediately alerted, neighing with their heads held high. Their eyes looked into the distance as if something was amiss. Snow fluttered in the air from afar as another large herd of horses galloped over. Their target was obviously the hot spring lake as well. The horses here retreated slowly, leaving only a snow-white steed standing at the front with its head held high. This horse was a full head taller than the other steeds, and its body was almost 5 feet long. Just by standing there, the tall, long-legged and extremely sturdy white horse gave off the aura of a powerhouse that could hold the fort against 10,000 enemies. It was so abundant and unstoppable that no one could compete with it. It seemed to be conveying a message: as long as I am here, don't even think of invading the stud farm. The rumbling from the other side was getting closer, heading straight for the hot spring lake. However, with a long neigh, the large herd of horses on the other side suddenly stopped in their tracks. The galloping of such a large number of horses actually came to an abrupt halt, without the slightest hint of disorder. Yunyang was utterly impressed by the sight. A herd of wild horses without a master could actually move in such a disciplined manner. If he had not witnessed it with his own eyes, he would never have believed that such a thing could happen in this world. It was like a miracle, almost like a miracle. The leader of the wild horse herd was a fiery red steed. The height and length of the red steed were almost the same as the snow-white steed. At this moment, it was letting out a provocative roar. It was obvious that it wanted to settle the matter regarding the ownership of the hot spring lake and use strength to determine the victor. Yunyang understood the situation the moment he saw it. It was the middle of winter. The weather was freezing and the snow was falling. In order to eat fresh water grass, the wild horses could only live near the hot spring lake. However, there was only one hot spring lake, and the two horse herds were fighting over the ownership of the hot spring lake. To Yunyang, this was completely unnecessary. The surface area of the hot spring lake was rather large. Due to the geothermal heat, the surrounding land of the hot spring lake was also covered with unusually dense grass. It was more than enough for the two horse herds to survive. There was no need to worry about the lack of resources or the worry of starvation. There was no need to fight at all. They could eat their fill in peace. However, this was Yunyang's idea. The two horse herds did not share the same thought, so they could only monopolize it. This was especially true for the two horse kings. They didn't think so. As the saying goes, a mountain cannot contain two tigers. In a herd of horses, only one horse king was needed, or rather, only one horse king could exist in a herd of horses. In fact, if there was only one horse king in two horse herds, they would have merged into one long ago. However, fate made fools of man and creation was mysterious. This place had given birth to two equally matched horse kings who were equally matched in all aspects. Then, the king of these two horses had to fight it out to determine who would be the sole king of horses. The horse herds on both sides were retreating. There was a large space in the middle. Although the red and white horses did not move and only stood opposite each other from afar, staring at each other, they were slowly pulling apart from the horse herds on both sides. Yunyang snuck to a spot not far from the hot spring lake. In the Tianshan continent, there was no man who did not like fine horses, and Yunyang was no exception. Before mastering the cloud manifestation, Yunyang had used horses as a means of transportation, especially the red and white horses here. Yunyang had fallen in love with them the moment he laid eyes on them. When he raised his eyes again, he heard two low roars from a relatively close distance. The moment he saw the overlord of the two horses, he couldn't help but immediately widen his eyes. The two horses that were originally separated by thousands of feet suddenly became like two bolts of lightning, and with an astonishing speed, as if they had traversed through space, they fiercely fought each other. Kicking, biting, ramming, every method of attack that a horse could use was completely displayed in this battle, and it was truly unscrupulous in its use. However, what truly shocked Yunyang was the fact that they were so far apart from each other. How could they have suddenly become entangled in a fight? Even the so-called white steed fleeting time could not be as fast as this. Unless these two horses could fly? Yunyang asked himself. Even when his cultivation base was at its pinnacle, it was impossible for him to cover such a long distance in a single leap. The two horses in front of him, on the other hand, had crossed the distance effortlessly, as if it was nothing at all. After another short moment, the battle between the two horses grew more and more intense, and it gradually transformed into two illusory phantoms that fought from the south to the north and from the east to the west. Occasionally they would intersect with each other like a ball of red and white flames that were extremely gorgeous, dazzling, and moving. Even when Yunyang tried his best, he still could not tell which side had gained the upper hand and was at an advantage. On both sides, millions of horses galloped on the spot, neighing at the sky. For a moment, the wind and clouds surged, deafening to the ears. It was obvious that both horse herds were cheering for their kings. The two horse kings were even more spirited when they heard the horses' cheers. As they neighed, they launched their attacks even faster, attacking and dodging like lightning. Four hooves kicked each other, their movements so nimble that Yun-Yang was dumbfounded. These are two horses? Were these still two horses? This was a duel between two experts of the martial arts world. Each attack, retreat were extremely methodical. They were not simple attacks of wild beasts. Yun-Yang had sneaked into the battlefield cautiously at first, but he realized that it was not that the horses did not see Yun-Yang, a stranger, but that they did not care and did not care. Even when Yun-Yang passed through the herd of horses, none of them reacted. There was only one mare who seemed to find Yun-Yang squeezing annoying and nudged him aside with its large buttocks. Her meaning was obvious. Scram, don't bother me. Can't you see that your mother here is looking at my idol? Yun-Yang was speechless. He was truly surprised by these horses' carelessness. In the end, Yun-Yang stood there openly, watching the battle of the century between the two horse kings with his arms crossed. However, looking at the current situation, these two fellows seemed to be unusually energetic. Even if they fought for another day, there might not be a clear winner. Did he have to wait here for a day? Moreover, if they were really done fighting with their speed, it would be impossible for him to catch them. It would be a silly joke. Yun-Yang pondered, feeling frustrated. If he still had the chi of vitality that he could use anytime, he would not have to go through so much trouble. The chi of vitality that was so alluring to all life in this world could allow Yun-Yang to subdue them effortlessly, but he did not have it now. Come to think of it, if the chi of vitality reappeared, it would mean that Emmy would reappear. His manifestation powers would most likely be restored as well. It seemed like he would not need to look for another form of transportation. Yun-Yang, who was unable to do so, rummaged through his spatial ring, hoping to find something that could attract the attention of the two horse kings. However, as he rummaged through, he only found some healing medicine and a few stalks of heaven and earth treasures. The horses did not seem to be very interested in these. Just as Yun-Yang was feeling frustrated and was about to retreat, intending to find a decent horse to use as a form of transportation, he suddenly remembered something. When he was saved by the old doctor and was surrounded by the villagers of Huangshan Pass village, he heard them say something very strange. Under the beach where he had been lying, there were a large number of fishes, regardless of the direction of the current, staying at the place where he was lying. Even when they were caught, they refused to give up, as if they were fighting for some treasure. Yun-Yang connected the dots at once, recalling the treasures of heaven and earth that he had eaten. He thought to himself, could it be that my flesh and blood have a special attraction to animals? However, horses did not like to eat flesh and blood. Could the attraction of his flesh and blood reach the level of a cross-species habit? Yun-Yang pondered for a moment before retrieving a knife from his spatial ring and began to mow the grass. A few horses snorted and walked over in annoyance, shoving Yun-Yang aside with their butts as well. Why is this person so annoying? It's fine if he stands here, but he actually wants to mow our grass. Does he think we don't know that humans can't eat grass? What a waste of good stuff. Yun-Yang scratched his head and ignored them, moving to another spot to continue his mow. The horses ignored him this time as if they did not see him. This person was too thick-skinned, it was useless whether he was chased away or not. Let him be. We have a lot of grass anyway. Even if you cut with your life on the line, how much can you mow alone? Yun-Yang cut a huge bundle of grass in one go and carried it forward, all the way to the center of the battlefield. Then, unexpectedly, he sat down. The two horse kings glanced at him arrogantly. He's just a human shrimp. Ignore him. Let's do our job. This was the right thing to do. With another long hiss, they fought together again, fighting in one place. Seeing the two horse kings' disdain towards him, Yun-Yang gritted his teeth and stabbed himself in the arm. Fresh blood dripped out at once. Yun-Yang followed their advice and sprinkled it evenly on the grass. If the horses don't come, I'll come, the horses will. Since you don't eat meat, I'll mix my blood into your food. Let's see if you guys are tempted or not. I wonder if it will work. If it did not work, Yun-Yang did not plan to waste any more time. He would just pick another horse and ride it. Although he could not tame the horse kings with his current cultivation base, it would not be a problem for him to tame ordinary horses. It was only to confirm if the method was effective. Yun-Yang, who had just recovered from his injury, did not want to waste too much blood. He had only drained half a bowl of blood and sprinkled it on the bundle of grass in front of him before quickly bandaging the wound. His body was too weak now. He was already feeling dizzy from letting out such a small amount of blood. If he were to let out more, he might actually pass out. The two horse kings were still engaged in their battle, not even sparing a glance in his direction. From east to west, from south to north, they crisscrossed, coming and going like lightning. As the two horses fought, the Red Horse King seemed to have gained the upper hand. On the other hand, the White Horse King seemed to be exhausted and gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. Coincidentally, a red silhouette flitted past Yun Yang and charged forward like a bolt of lightning, ready to follow up on his victory and take down his opponent in one fell swoop. The White Horse King let out a long neigh filled with unwillingness. Its neigh was filled with a solemn and stirring emotion. It seemed to have a premonition that it would definitely lose if the battle went on and lose its position as the Horse King. Seeing the red horse charging towards it, the White Horse King did not show any signs of weakness. It assumed a stance ready to face the attack head-on. From Yun Yang's point of view, if the collision were to happen, it would be a lose-lose situation. It was more likely that the white horse would die while the red horse would be gravely injured. No one would be able to emerge victorious and neither side would be able to do well. However, the White Horse King stared in bewilderment. The Red Horse King suddenly turned from its gallop, drawing an arc in the air as it dashed back. What was it trying to do? Was there some other sinister plot? The White Horse King looked over in bewilderment, watching as the Red Horse King sprinted towards the human who was squatting on the ground. Its front hooves kicked lightly a few times before it lowered its head and snorted. The White Horse King's eyes widened. What was going on? Our horses only make such noises when they're comfortable and yearning for something. You're young and naive, Xiaohong, but you shouldn't be doing this to a human, should you? What are you yearning for? What are you comfortable about? Have you seen the world? Where's your Horse King demeanor? Yun Yang lifted his head and saw a large red horse head in front of him. Its nose twitched, its eyes filled with yearning as it stared fixedly at the bundle of grass beside his hand. More accurately, it was staring at the grass that was bathed in his blood. There was hope. Yun Yang put on a kind expression and said in a gentle voice, "Do you want to eat it?" The red horse looked at him warily and hopped 2 steps back. Its eyes were wide open as it stared at Yun Yang cautiously. Yun Yang pushed the tender grass in his hand forward and said, "Do you want to eat it? Do you want to eat it or not?" The red horse paced back and forth restlessly. It shook its head and looked into the distance. Then, it turned its head back and focused all of its attention on the green grass in front of it. Its throat was growling and saliva was dripping from the corner of its mouth. "I think you just don't want to eat it." Yun Yang sighed and picked up a straw rope that he had made to kill time earlier. He collected the huge bundle of grass on the ground and tied it together with the rope. Then he slung it on his back and turned to leave. Clip-clop, clip-clop. The red horse followed behind him, its eyes still staring longingly at the grass on its back. It snorted impatiently and then snorted again. It obviously wanted to extend its mouth to eat it, but it instinctively felt the danger. However, it did not want to give up. It was the most tempting impulse it had ever felt in its life. Due to the situation, the red horse could only follow step by step. Yun Yang seemed to feel the danger of carrying the grass on his back, so he hugged it in his arms and continued to move forward. His speed was even increasing. The red horse panicked. It dared not eat it, but smelling it was good enough. "Why did you put it in front of you? Why are you so stingy?" It took another 2 steps forward and nudged Yun Yang's back with its head. Yun Yang turned back to look. The red horse retreated 30 to 40 feet as if it had been frightened, looking at him warily. Yun Yang waved his hand and said, "No need to send me off. I'm leaving now. I'm afraid we won't see each other again." Before his words echoed in the air, he turned to leave again. The red horse gave chase again. He turned his head again. He retreated again. He turned back and the red horse gave chase again. Just like that, a grand show of intrigue and intrigue began. While the show was going on, the White Horse King in the middle of the battlefield saw that its opponent had actually ignored it and was wholeheartedly following behind the human. It had no idea what the White Horse King was doing and for a moment, it was at a loss. It was speechless. What was it trying to do? What was it doing? Why was it acting so strangely? Humans might not understand what the red horse was trying to do, but the white horse was able to understand it at first glance. It was obviously trying to curry favor, it was even trying to flatter. But what was going on? Why did it start sucking up to someone else when it was fighting me? Did it still have the integrity of a horse king? Did it have the dignity and pride of a strong man? I'm actually standing side by side with this horse. I'm so embarrassed. I'm still King bruised and it hurts so much. How come his opponent was gone just like that? It went to flatter and fawn. King broke the rules. Why didn't you offer yourself and let that person ride you? If you let that person ride you, then this daddy will truly be convinced by you. Then you'll be in heaven. The white horse, who was cursing in its heart, watched as its opponent followed that strange human for hundreds of feet. It could not help but let out a long neigh, venting its deep dissatisfaction. That person did have some grass in his hands, but didn't we eat grass every day? Was there something special about that person's grass? Haven't you ever eaten grass in your 8 lives? Do you lack grass that much? Can't you do without it? Can't you even hold on for a while with less grass? It actually followed him just like that. You really made us lose our horses. You're lowering our majesty. The red horse was stunned. It turned its head and let out a long neigh, its voice full of disdain. What the F***ck do you know? Is that normal grass? How could it be normal grass? Do you think I'm a stupid horse that hasn't seen the world? No matter what, my brother is the king of horses of this generation. I don't lack grass, it's just that I haven't tasted this top-grade grass before. Do you think that top-grade grass is so easy to see, smell, and touch? I really F***king want to eat it. Yun Yang had turned back several times to entice and tease the stallion. Slowly, the red stallion could no longer hold it in. It began to move forward on its own accord, snuggling behind Yun Yang's buttocks. The horse's mouth bit Yun Yang's shirt and its tail flicked loudly. It was like a little girl walking while holding an adult's sleeve. She wanted something good but was too embarrassed to ask for it. She could only follow impatiently, pouting anxiously, hoping that the adult would be more perceptive and give the good stuff away. But why was this person in front of him so blind? It was such a big bundle of grass, would it kill him to give him a little? However, as Yun Yang turned back and tried to touch it with his hand, the red horse gradually stopped rejecting him, getting used to it. He could touch it, he wouldn't really mind losing a piece of horse meat. But now that he had touched it, he was giving it to him. Yun Yang had gone from a light touch at the beginning to touching it up, down, left, and right. The more he touched, the more satisfied he became. His eyes were already squinting into slits. This red horse was a horse that had just reached adulthood. It looked to be 4 or 5 years old at most. If it were a human, it would be a 17 or 18-year-old youth. Although this was the peak period of a horse's life, the quality of this red horse had reached a level that would make people's jaws drop. Furthermore, Yun Yang could feel an inexplicable surge of energy coursing through the horse's body. This energy was not something that a horse should possess. Yun Yang guessed that this horse and the white horse must have eaten something special, causing their bodies to mutate to a certain extent. Otherwise, it was impossible for a horse's innate ability to be so strong. Seeing that his plan was working, Yun Yang finally pulled a few strands of grass from the big bundle and placed them beside the horse's mouth like he was giving alms. Yun Yang was sure that after eating the grass that had been bathed in his blood, the red horse would no longer be able to resist the temptation to follow him. The red horse did not care about anything else. Its eyes shone as it opened its mouth and rolled its tongue, chewing the few strands of grass in front of it. Once it entered its mouth, its eyes shone with excitement. As it ate, its eyes stared at Yun Yang fawningly. Yes, it was staring at the big bundle of grass greedily. Yun Yang held the horse's back and patted it lightly. It was obvious that he wanted more grass. Sure, but you have to use yourself in exchange. Let your father ride you and you'll get the grass. The red horse seemed to understand his intention immediately and took a few steps back. Its gaze turned to Yun Yang warily, dissatisfaction evident in its gaze. I treat you as a friend and I want your grass. You actually want to ride me? How could there be such a thing in this world? Chapter 472. Yun Yang's reaction to the red horse was within his expectations, so he did not mind it at all. He continued walking forward as if he did not care at all. The red stallion hesitated for a moment as it watched the person walk further and further away, but it could not resist the temptation of delicacies. It stalked after Yun Yang once more and repeated what it had done before, using its head to nudge Yun Yang's hand and back, its intention to beg for grass. Yun Yang flung his arm away and avoided it. He hugged a big bundle of grass and walked forward angrily, not letting the stallion touch it anymore. The horse glared innocently and followed him with its head lowered. It then went forward to touch it again but was not allowed to. Touch again, touch again, touch. The red stallion shook its head happily, flicking its tail and sticking out its tongue to curl the grass. This time Yun Yang took out another 2 to 3 stalks of grass and passed them over. The red stallion ate them happily. Not only was it not satiated, but its desire grew even stronger. It wanted nothing more than to chew the entire bundle of grass in Yun Yang's embrace. Yun Yang placed his hand on the horse's back once more. The horse immediately retreated again, but it was still very hesitant. After 3 consecutive times, Yun Yang seemed to be completely infuriated. He quickened his pace and walked forward. No matter how the horse fawned, or acted coquettishly, he did not touch it anymore. He would not let the grass eat it. He had already walked a distance of about 10,000 feet. The white stallion and the horses on both sides were dumbfounded and speechless. It was obvious that they did not know what was going on. After a while, the red stallion could no longer hold it in. It suddenly galloped to Yun Yang, its head bobbing up and down before it snuggled into Yun Yang's embrace and opened its mouth to eat the grass. You can't coax it so you snatch it? Are you robbing a horse? Why don't you go to heaven if you're so capable? Yun Yang was furious. With a flick of his wrist, the bundle of grass disappeared in an instant. The red stallion was stunned. Where's my grass? Where's my delicacy? Where did it go? Could this person know magic? How could he just disappear into thin air? A horse was a horse after all. It did not know that a spatial ring was a must-have item for traveling, but it knew that it was Yun Yang's doing. It paced around anxiously, its eyes eager to please. Yun Yang snorted and ignored it, walking forward as if he did not see a horse like this in front of him. When the horse approached him again, he immediately dodged and took a detour. You want grass but you dare not let me ride you. I don't want you anymore, okay? Yun Yang's determination terrified the red stallion. This human is actually ignoring me. What should they do? If I eat more of that grass, it will be even more beneficial to me and I can become even more outstanding. As long as I eat all of them, I feel that my bloodline can be purified to an unprecedented level. Yun Yang continued to walk forward. The red stallion was obviously anxious, hopping in front of him and nudging him backward with its head. Yun Yang dodged again and again, but the horse stopped him again and again. They fell into a strange stalemate. After a while, Yun Yang, who saw that the horse was really hungry, finally stopped. The red horse stood in front of him in a submissive manner. Umph. Yun Yang suddenly snorted coldly and was about to walk over from the side. The red stallion panicked. It suddenly neighed and plopped onto the ground. With a roll, its white belly was exposed. Its four hooves were half curled towards the sky, its eyes staring at a certain unscrupulous human. Yun Yang was amused and annoyed at the same time. He scolded, if you can't steal it then you snatch it. If you can't snatch it then you flatter it. Aren't you the king of horses? Where's your style? Where's your pride? Where's the lower limit of your integrity? I've really broadened my horizons today. Of course, the horse did not understand what he was saying, only looking at him with its head tilted. Yun Yang went around it and continued to walk forward. Seeing that someone was still walking, the horse stood up and followed behind him, pestering him shamelessly. I won't give up if I can't eat the grass. Yun Yang sighed and took out a small handful of grass that seemed to materialize out of thin air. The horse was overjoyed, rushing forward to eat it from Yun Yang's palm. Its wet tongue even licked Yun Yang's palm in a fawning manner. Yun Yang took out another handful. The horse's eyes shone as it came forward again. Yun Yang did not give it the grass directly. Instead, he pressed his palm against the horse's back once more, pushing it down. The red stallion did not retreat this time, but it stood stiffly for a long time, as if thinking whether it should yield or not. It knew very well that as long as it allowed this human to ride its body, it would no longer be free. However, if it did not allow this person to ride it, it would never be able to eat the grass. If it wanted grass, it would have to be ridden. The red stallion whimpered, looking at Yun Yang with teary eyes. It was obvious that it did not want to give up its freedom. However, it did not want to give up the delicious grass either. Yun Yang could feel the struggle clearly. After all, a certain someone was not that crazy. His heart softened as he said, all right. You'll only help me for a while, then I'll let you go. What do you say? The red stallion tilted its head and looked at him innocently. Yun Yang said seriously, I'm a gentleman. I've never told lies, nor will I go back on my word. The horse looked at him with its head tilted, its gaze softening slowly. It whimpered and flicked its tail, finally lowering itself slowly. Yun Yang was overjoyed as he hopped up. This was the first time the red horse had been ridden by someone. It shook its body a little unnaturally and then it had a new feeling. This state was not a big deal. This guy did not weigh much and it was not a big deal without him. It seemed to have gotten used to it after running a few steps with Yun Yang on its back. It rubbed its head against Yun Yang's leg and opened its mouth, its eyes filled with desire. All right, I'll give it to you, I'll give it all to you. Yun Yang chortled and grabbed a bunch of them, sending them to the red stallion's mouth. The red stallion was overjoyed at once, munching and chewing, its eyes filled with contentment. Under Yun Yang's command, the red stallion galloped out of the mountain, ignoring the calls of the millions of horses behind it. At this moment, the sound of hooves rang out from behind. A bolt of white lightning leaped overtaking Yun Yang and the red stallion to block their path. It was the king of the white horse. Only another king of horses, would have the courage, the speed, and the qualification to stop the red stallion. The white horse king blocked the path with an anxious look in its eyes. It looked at the little red horse and snorted as it neighed loudly. The red horse listened attentively to the white horse's neighing. When the white horse's neighing stopped, the red horse raised its head to the sky and let out a long neigh. It slowly walked over and used its nose to touch the white horse's nose as if bidding farewell. It then took 2 steps back. After a moment of silence, all 4 of its hooves moved without warning, like a red cloud carrying Yun Yang as it galloped away at lightning speed. This time the white stallion did not give chase. It stood alone on the spot, watching the red silhouette leave, its eyes filled with confusion. Why had its old rival given up on the throne of kings so easily? Had it left with someone else just like that? As the king of horses, the most honorable horse in the world, it was only a handful of grass, and it had already been seduced? Did it still have any morals? Did it have any bottom line? Was it so willing to be ridden by someone else? The millions of horses behind it neighed in unison, as if urging their king to return or sending him off. However, the red stallion had already galloped far away without turning back. Yun Yang rode on the horse's back. It was only a simple run-in, but the man and the horse had achieved a seamless cooperation. The red stallion's ability to comprehend was astonishing. It could even be considered extremely intelligent. During the run-in, Yun Yang had only hinted a few times and the horse was already running properly. The red stallion shot into the distance like an arrow. It was galloping at such a high speed, but Yun Yang did not feel much of a jolt as he rode on the horse's back. The horse harness that the villagers had prepared for him was completely useless. Of course, Yun Yang was unwilling to use reins, saddles, and other tools to restrain this highly intelligent steed. He might as well just leave it naked. After all, with his riding skills, there was not much of a difference between having a saddle or not. Yun Yang had purposely slowed down his speed until noon. When he stopped to rest, his broken legs and bones could no longer stand the jolts. He realized that the red stallion had already run more than 500 miles. Yun Yang was surprised. Ever since he had gotten the red pony, he had only been running for 4 hours. How could it have already run such a long distance? According to common sense, a horse that could travel 1,000 miles in a day could already be said to be a top-notch treasure horse in the world. Even 1,000 miles in a day was just a synonym for a treasure horse. Very few horses could truly do this, and even if they could, it was not normal. However, the little red horse under him clearly had a limit that was far beyond this. If it was allowed to run as much as it wanted. In just a day, it would not be difficult to run a distance of 3,000 miles, and it could run even further. In the beginning, Yun Yang would grab a few stalks of grass to feed the horse after running a certain distance. After 7 to 8 times, the red stallion stopped eating when he took out the grass again, but it moved faster and faster. It was still energetic and did not show any signs of fatigue. Looks like the grass bathed in my blood has an extraordinary effect. This horse can only eat a certain amount a day. The amount it has eaten so far should be enough for it to digest and absorb for some time. Yun Yang heaved a sigh of relief. Not only is this horse highly perceptive and intelligent, it has a sense of propriety and is sensible. The red stallion snorted. It's not that I don't want to eat, but it's useless to eat too much. There's only so much of it. That's my food. I have to eat it sparingly and eat it slowly. Besides, there's no other horse to eat it other than me. It's a good choice to keep some stock for myself so there's always a surprise. Chapter 473. The red stallion looked at him with sparkling eyes and nodded lightly in agreement. Now that the little red stallion was fully impressed by Yun Yang's grass attack, it could hardly object to Yun Yang's request. However, if the little red stallion knew about Yun Yang's glorious history of naming and his past achievements, it would rather jump off a cliff than allow its unscrupulous master to name it. It was a pity that it did not know now. When it did, it would be too late. It would be over for it if it was too late. You're all red. Shall we call you Big Red? Yun Yang asked. The red stallion stared at Yun Yang in a daze, its tail swaying uncontrollably. Big Red? What kind of lousy name was that? Could it be any more vulgar than that? You don't like Big Red? You're still young, it's not appropriate to call you Big Red. How about Little Red? Yun Yang asked tentatively. Hoo, The red stallion was still swinging its tail in displeasure. What, big red or little red? This horse king is a male. Didn't you see how long it was when I turned over? Why can't you even come up with a name? Don't you know how to be majestic? How preposterous. Still not satisfied? Yin Yang frowned. I really think that Little Red is a good name. It suits you very well. If you're really not satisfied, we can change it. But this is the last one. This name is final. You're not allowed to say it again. The stallion looked at Yin Yang expectantly, hoping that its new master would give it a good name. Like Southern Badian, Warhorse King, Pegasus, Dragon Horse, Crimson King, and so on. Even if he was called Little Red Dragon or Little Red Tiger, it would still be good. I've decided to call you Ready from now on. Yin Yang said excitedly, Ready, isn't this an awesome name? When others hear it, they'll know how red you are. Red all over, red name, and twice as red. There's no other name that suits you better. The red stallion was foaming at the mouth, its heart shut tight. Was there a need for others to hear it? Just look at it, alright? You thought about it for so long and came up with such a bullsh T name? Ready is not as good as Big Red or Little Red. How is this double red? Can you be a little more despicable? Hong Hong, the red stallion no longer had the energy to complain about this new name. It snorted in protest, spraying saliva all over Yin Yang's face. How could it know that Yin Yang's naming of the past was already infuriating? Its red name was merely a reflection of its appearance, like Bai Bai and Ji, which had long been seen. Fate, this was fate. There was a price to pay for a moment of pleasure, a heavy and painful price to pay. Horse King Hong Hong was born. Hong Hong, look at how excited you are. You must really like the name I gave you, right? Yin Yang was shameless as he said happily, there's a shop in front. Let's go there and have some food and rest. You don't know how tired I am from riding you. My back and legs are aching. I'm not feeling well now and can't go on for long. When I'm fully recovered, it'll be the time for you to taste your master's majesty. Are you looking forward to it? Red Horse? Redbird wanted to cry but no tears came out. When did you see that I was satisfied with this name? I'm a horse, you're a human. Our communication is effective, alright? Do you know whether I'm satisfied or not? You've raped a horse like this. This Hong Hong will definitely take revenge. However, the horse's eyes widened immediately. What did its master eat? Why did it smell so good? What food could smell so good? Yin Yang sat down at a small tavern by the roadside and casually ordered wine and food while he consumed various healing medicines and rubbed his injured thigh. The faint pain told him that he had to be careful with his injury. If he continued to gallop like this, his newly healed leg might be crippled again before he could even reach the battlefield. As the only customer of this roadside tavern, Yin Yang's food and wine were served quickly. Not only were 3 stir-fried dishes served piping hot, there was also a plate of braised meat. Yin Yang chewed twice. This bacon was not beef, but a low-level mystical beast's meat. He was the best in the world at distinguishing between livestock meat and mystical beast meat. After all, he had been a glutton for a long time. How could he not know this? He poured himself a bowl of wine and was about to drink it and eat heartily when his vision suddenly darkened. Hong Hong? What are you doing? Yin Yang was genuinely shocked by the current situation. Hong Hong's huge horse head came over at an inopportune time, staring at the wine in his bowl greedily and snorting. I want a drink. Although Hong Hong did not know how to speak the human language, the meaning of these 3 words was clearly expressed. Hong Hong was actually a horse that wanted to drink wine? Yin Yang's mind froze. When he recovered, he saw that the bowl in front of him was already empty. Hong Hong snorted a few times in excitement. If Hong Hong was not a red horse, its flushed face would have been frozen in front of Yin Yang's eyes. You really drank it? Yin Yang was speechless again. However, Hong Hong still looked as if it wanted more if it had not drunk enough. It dawdled and flicked its tail at Yin Yang, urging him to drink more. Waiter, get me another bowl. No matter how speechless Yin Yang was, he could not really stay silent. At least this bowl could not be used. With a roll of Hong Hong's fat tongue, it took care of both the inside and outside of the bowl. No matter how much Yin Yang liked Hong Hong, it was not to the point where they could share a bowl. While waiting for the other bowl to arrive, Yin Yang lifted the wine pot and poured ready another bowl of wine, thinking to himself, I can't guarantee a sufficient supply of fresh blood and grass, but I can't limit the wine. However, this fellow won't be drunk, will he? However, Hong Hong downed 3 consecutive bowls without batting an eyelid. It was obvious that it had a lot of tolerance. It was the god of wine among horses. Yin Yang was amazed. During the meal, Yin Yang circulated his mystical qi a few times. Other than recovering his stamina, he also allowed the medicine he had just consumed to swiftly heal his meridians, strengthening his broken bones that had grown back together. It was best to use mystical qi to activate the medicinal effect. After a round of recuperation, he felt much more relaxed. However, Yunyang still recognized the current situation. He could not run like this anymore, his body could not handle it. Yunyang sighed inwardly, lamenting the fact that his body did not live up to his expectations. Using Hong Hong as a means of transportation, there was almost no jolt on Hong Hong's back. However, it was a long journey after all, and it was still a great damage to his body that had yet to recover. One's life experience had to be tempered through the years. It was not something that could be replaced by one's cultivation base or the level of one's cultivation base. I really need to slow down a little. Yunyang pressed on his injured leg. No matter how anxious I am, I can't let myself go to the battlefield half-crippled. I'll only be a burden and won't be of any help at all. Now that I have Hong Hong as a means of transportation, I'll definitely reach the eastern border earlier than expected. There's no need to force myself, or else I'll really be more eager than I am. It was a pity that the ideal was beautiful, but the reality was harsh. Things never went according to one's wishes. After resuming their journey, Yunyang was annoyed to find that this wine-loving horse had been fine when it had just finished drinking, but after a while of galloping, the alcohol in its body had been unleashed as its blood flow was unimpeded. It had actually begun to throw a drunken tantrum. The drunken horse was indeed charging forward in a frenzy. It was no longer as stable as it had been when it was moving, causing Yunyang to feel dizzy. I won't let you drink any more. Yunyang swore solemnly in his heart. When it was close to evening that day, the sky was not dark yet. Yunyang went in to find an inn to stay when he saw a town. Heal. Healing was the most important thing right now. There were still about 4,000 miles to go to the battlefield, and they were bound to face a great battle when they arrived. He had to be in perfect condition to deal with it. No news had come back, which was the best news. It meant that the war was still going on. It was good that they had not been defeated. The fortress of resilience. The battle here had been devastating, the sun and moon had lost their light. It was the war of the century, the scale of which was unprecedented. The war between Yutang and Dongxian was growing more intense. Not only had Dongxian sent in more troops to suppress the eastern line with the strength of the entire nation, but Yutang's reinforcements had also arrived. Other than the martial artists and ordinary citizens who came daily, Yutang's military reinforcements had arrived as well. The first to arrive was the Western Line's 150,000 troops. The Western Line's Marshal Wang Yunzhu did not hold back at all this time. He had sent the Western troops' most elite and most capable troops. To put it bluntly, without these 150,000 men, the Western Line was now an empty shell. Its overall combat power had been reduced by at least 60%. The Western Line's Marshal Wang Yunzhu had said it well. Lord Supreme Cloud's presence in Zilong City and suppression of the Empire of Zio has dampened the Empire's morale and will to fight. They won't be able to form a threatening attack within a short period of time. It can be said that the war that should have been dealt with by the Western Line has been fought for us by Lord Supreme Cloud. The Western Line is relaxed now, but Yutang's crisis is still there. The Eastern Line is facing a tough battle. The Empire of Dongxian, with Han Sanhe as their marshal, is leading millions of soldiers to attack the Fortress of Resilience. That's why we have to go and help. Actually, helping is only secondary. The main point is to let you brats go and see how the Eastern troop fights. Why Marshal Fu Baogua is acknowledged by Yutang's military as the top of Yutang's younger generation. However, your father has something to say first. Picking all of you out of the Western troops' 400,000 men to go to help is not to embarrass your father. Whoever embarrasses himself there will embarrass the Western troop. King Hell, even if you die on the battlefield, your father will forge a monument of cowardice and send it to your hometown. I'll erect it at your doorstep. I'll erect it on your ancestors' graves. Now your father departs. Go to the Eastern Line and fight that King Han Sanhe for your father. Chapter 474. The Commander-in-Chief's words were majestic and powerful and resonant. However, no one in the Western troop dared to doubt the words spoken by this man who was widely acknowledged as the most boorish, unreasonable, adept at scolding and cursing people's ancestors. He could really do what he said. He would definitely do what he said when he said he would erect a tombstone in front of anyone's house if they were a coward. He would do exactly the same when the time came. There would be no room for negotiation. The elites of the Western Legion roared as they charged out. There was a voice in everyone's heart that answered, "We can't be cowards even if we're beaten to death." If a tombstone of shame were to be erected in front of their house, F***ck, how could their families face the world in the future? Moreover, Wang Yunju's last sentence ignited the blood of all the soldiers in the Western Army. Fu Baogua is Yutong's top young general, this is publicly acknowledged. Your father is convinced, but the Eastern troop has always been called Yutong's top troop, your father is not convinced. Remember to snatch this title back for your father when I send you over. Your father has lost once, my subordinates must not lose again. Snatch it back. We must snatch it back. 850,000 men roared in unison, causing the ground to tremble. The leader of the reinforcement troops was the vanguard of the Western Army, Sun Zihu, the most valiant general under Wang Yunju. Before leaving, Marshal Wang called Sun Zihu aside and said solemnly, "Sun Zihu, you must remember, Marshal, can you call me by my full name? You can even call me Huzi. Don't you find it awkward to call me grandson with such a serious expression?" Sun Zihu looked at his commander with extreme displeasure. His face was full of whiskers. **ck scram. Scram scram. Your father wanted to give you a few more reminders, but I'm not in the mood now. I won't say anything to you. Wang Yunju kicked his trusted subordinate away. Sun Zihu scrambled to his feet and left. Following which the army set off and left quickly. Seeing that the army was getting further and further away, Wang Yunju slapped the big tree beside him in annoyance. I wanted to tell him to bring back as many brothers alive as possible. I was already so serious, but that bastard is so insensitive. If he really dares to kill too many of our brothers, I'll really turn his grandson into a grandson. The generals at the side rolled their eyes at him. Insensitive? Marshal, you've been calling him grandson for 8 years. Who can understand such amorous feelings? Your solemn, formal, and serious attitude is really too formal, too serious, too serious, too serious, too serious. The reason why Sun Zihu didn't argue with you on the spot like he usually is probably because you're being so formal and serious. Sun Zihu is really giving you face. However, they only cursed in their hearts and didn't say it out loud. After all, everyone knew the marshal's true thoughts. When the army was far away and could no longer be seen, the vulgar and abnormally boorish Grand Marshal stood on that high spot for a long time, gazing into the distance for a long time. It was as if he could still see the long-gone figures of the reinforcements from the Western Front, but also as if he was looking forward to the safe return of his soldiers. His lonely figure, with his hands behind his back, kept gazing into the distance. He didn't move a single step until the sky turned dark. No one dared to look at the marshal's face. All the generals silently went back by themselves. That night, the Western camp was silent. It was said that the marshal was drunk, which was rare for him. He was dead drunk. Sun Zihu had been traveling at lightning speed all along the way. Especially when he left, he tried his best to control himself and not look back. He had followed the marshal for 11 years. After spending 11 years together, he knew the marshal's temperament like the back of his hand. At the last moment, how could Sun Zihu not know what the marshal wanted to say? However, he didn't let the marshal say it. Because if the marshal said it, he was afraid that he would cry uncontrollably. He was a man, yet a 7-foot-tall man was crying. It was too embarrassing. However, going to the Eastern Front this time, to participate in the most tragic battle of his life. How many of his 150,000 brothers would come back alive? No one could guarantee this. Even Sun Zihu himself didn't have the confidence to come back alive. Marshal, if I, Sun Zihu, can come back alive, I will still be your vanguard. At that time, even if you still call me grandson. Damn it, can you not call me grandson anymore? Sun Zihu wiped away the tears in his eyes and replied to himself on behalf of the marshal in his heart, damn it. If I don't call you grandson, how can I call you grandfather? So what if I call you grandson? I want to call you grandson for the rest of my life. Grandson, grandson. Damn it. The marshal is so rude. I can't change it in this lifetime. Sun Zihu scolded jokingly, laughing with tears in his eyes. The deputy general beside him was also a tall and strong fellow. He asked in disbelief, General, are you crying? Sun Zihu was enraged when he heard that. His face flushed and his hair stood on end as he roared with all his might, damn it. You're the one crying. You're the one who's crying. Do you have eyes for pissing? When did I cry? You bastard. Men, record this general's military order. Wang Daxiong has belittled his superior. Next month's pay will be deducted. Wang Daxiong was speechless. Mimpi. He was clearly crying, and yet he didn't allow anyone to say anything. Deducting pay at the drop of a hat. Don't you know any other tricks? My pay for the past 3 years has already been confiscated by you. If it weren't for the fact that you took the money and gave your pay to the families of the martyrs, I would have already chopped you up with my sword. The army marched day and night without stopping. By the time Sun Zihu led the Western reinforcements to the Fortress of Resilience, they had arrived a day and a half ahead of schedule. All the elites of the Western army were steaming hot in this cold weather. However, this had become the norm for the Western reinforcements. Everyone's cotton clothes had been drenched in sweat at least 30 to 40 times along the way. They had to continue wearing them even when they were drenched, drying themselves with their own body temperature. They dared not take them off no matter how uncomfortable they were. Once they were taken off to dry, the cotton clothes would immediately turn into hard metal in the cold weather. By then they would truly have nothing to wear. However, Sun Zihu's eyes widened the moment he saw the situation in front of the Fortress of Resilience. When he rushed over, it was just when the offensive and defensive sides had just finished a battle. The ground in front of the Fortress of Resilience was dyed crimson. The Fortress of Resilience was a pass that would be reinforced by generations of defending generals, but it was already filled with signs of destruction. Everything else aside, just the marks on the tens of thousands of caddies of rocks that had been used to forge the walls sent chills down Sun Zihu's spine. What kind of attack had they endured to leave such marks? As far as the eye could see, the rock that was rumored to be indestructible was covered in cracks, and some of the outer layers of the rock had already been ripped off. Sun Zihu, who had been through hundreds of battles, knew what kind of situation this would happen. Only when the attacking soldiers had already rushed up the walls but had yet to step in would such a situation occur. In other words, someone had already climbed up to the top of the wall in the battle just now, grabbing onto it with both hands. He only needed to flip over and he would be able to enter. However, he was suddenly pushed back down at that very moment. The soldier who fell from the top of the city wall, following the strongest survival instinct of human nature, made him grab randomly in that instant, hoping to grab anything that could support him and stabilize his body. Only in that kind of situation would he be able to dig out that kind of stone fragment from the outside of the city wall. The entire outer wall of the Fortress of Resilience was in such a state. How many times of intense seesaw attacks and defenses had they gone through to achieve such a state? The more he thought about it, the more intimidated he became. It was truly frightening and soul-stirring. At that moment, Dongxuan's troops outside the fortress were cleaning up the corpses of their fallen soldiers. Upon closer inspection, Sun Zihu felt a chill run down his spine, his muscles tightening. Looking from afar, many of Dongxuan's soldiers' corpses could no longer be carried on stretchers. There were simply too many dead. There were simply not enough stretchers to carry them. Dongxuan's troops had used carriages to load the carriages, laying down long and wide wooden planks. The corpses of the fallen soldiers were tossed onto the carriages like broken sacks. A wooden carriage could probably hold dozens of corpses. If they were piled higher, there would be a few more. This was only the surface of the corpses strewn all over the ground. After moving one corpse, there were still many more below. Another layer was moved and another layer was moved. It was only when the ground was dyed red that the process of cleaning up the corpses came to an end. In spite of this, the blood that flowed on the ground was even more ghastly. The elites of the Western troops sucked in a cold breath, their hearts chilled. Tragic. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.